A 34-year-old man with long hair emerges in a completely destroyed city, convinced that place could only be hell. With his sword in hand, he wondered how everything had gone so terribly wrong. He pondered whether, if he had learned fencing earlier, he might have been able to prevent his sister from being sent to the Empire. If that had happened, maybe he wouldn't have become the monster he was. He was already tired of everything. Besides, he could have met his master in a scenario very different from that one. A girl with black hair stares deeply at him while the young man remains lost in thoughts about his master, about how he had spent the best moments of his life with him, and how the man meant much more than just a savior to him. Sighing, he concluded that he would have treated him better if he had known he would regret it this much. Sitting with his sword all dirty with ink, the fighter pants with exhaustion. And looking at the damage he had caused in the village, he was certain that wasn't what he wanted, until someone holding a sword walks toward him, which alarms the young man. A little boy points the sword at him, trembling with fear. It was somewhat pitiful to see that scene, so the man says he didn't want to hit children and shouldn't be treated like that. But the brat keeps the blade pointed at his face, claiming he had killed his father. For a moment, the young man seems regretful, but then he mocks the boy's feelings, which makes Jack even more upset, calling him a monster. Deep down, the man cared about what the kid was going to say, but monster was already a nickname he was used to. At that moment, he was more concerned about his body tingling and throbbing with pain. He felt a sharp pain and a sensation that his brain might melt at any moment, constantly sending signals to stop and just end everything. However, staring at the blonde boy, he knew he had to hold on a little longer, just a little longer. Then he asks, "A monster?" Following up by saying that he was the monster, since he had destroyed all the masters by himself and ended the great nation of the Tulkun Empire and the imperial family. The man asks if the boy knew how many people he had already annihilated, leaving the child speechless. Smiling proudly, he claims to have destroyed more than hundreds of thousands, so it was kind of obvious he was a monster. His words managed to get into the little blonde's head, who trembles even more while trying to keep the sword raised. Seeing the boy like that reminded him of when he was a young monster himself, and he asks his name. But when the boy replies, Jack Stewart, the warrior's expression changes completely. He comments that, coincidentally, his name was also Jack. Bursting into laughter, he says he had taken down a lot of people, but didn't remember any Stewart. The brat's voice comes out trembling as he explains that even if his father wasn't much, he was still a father he needed to have. Stopping to think, the man could even feel a little envy. Still, he wouldn't apologize for what he did, but he would give the boy a chance instead, leaving the blonde confused. Pointing to the boy's sharp sword, he tells him to use the object to stab him. He was sweating cold from the whole situation and seemed more lost than ever. But the man just insists that it was the perfect opportunity for him to avenge his father and be adored as the hero who defeated the monster. And he knew he could escape even with his leg and some organs injured, but that wasn't what he wanted. So he kept provoking the kid, until finally the boy raises the sword, still trembling, to strike him. However, all he does is fall to his knees in front of the monster. Seeing the tears streaming down his face, the man is surprised by the fact that the boy couldn't bring himself to kill him. He caresses the boy's hair, congratulating him because he knew he wouldn't live in peace if he went through with it. After all, a hero would carry many names on his back, and he advises him to live without regrets like he did, because unlike the man, the little blonde was still young. All he did was break down in tears as usual. Slowly, the long-haired man's determination weakened. Then he asked the child to tell the others that the demon was finished, and so was the war, which made the little one ask, "Old man, why? With all that power, why did you choose to live like this?" He held onto his sword, searching for strength to explain, but collapsed to the ground before he could finish. That was the end. He could feel the sensations in his fingers leaving, like a balloon losing air. His vision blurred, and even though he didn't want to, his eyes slowly closed. At the moment he forgot to breathe, all the sounds around him vanished. In that last moment of life, one thought consumed his mind. If he started everything from zero, would it be possible to change this pitiful ending? That's when he emerged into himself as if he were dreaming. As if for a moment he was just a child again. He remembered his father, who questioned whether he was really his biological son, and the death of his mother right after he was born. His older sister, who was known for her beauty throughout the continent, and even half-brother who constantly bullied him. He remembered everything. After abandoning the name Jack Valantier, he became a swordsman and traveled the whole continent, his memories flashing by. He got to the point where he was confused about whether he was dreaming or not. Had he really died? And now he was seeing the end of his life flashing before him. Sweet and cold, a little boy was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Memories of the Second Continental War emerged in his mind. He was victorious, a ruthless ruler, and the greatest monster among all present monsters. His inner self, driven by revenge, destroyed the Tulkun Empire and dominated the Western continent, wiping out everyone who bore the Tulkun name. After declaring victory, he was happy to have achieved his goals. Then, by his own will, he accepted his imminent passing as he had no further reason to remain. That's how his heart stopped. But if that was the case, what the hell was happening? The little boy in question was Jack himself, as if he had gone back to the past. Desperate, he wondered how that was possible. pinching himself to be sure it wasn't just an illusion. He was in the Valentier Marquis house, a renowned family in the Teslan kingdom, and belonged to the loyal group that supported the king. There, he was the youngest among the siblings, the youngest member of the family that held the Marquis title in the kingdom. If he hadn't been greedy for the heir's title, he could have lived a much more comfortable life, but his house was an exception. Strolling through the rose garden, the boy contemplated the place he knew so well. It could be called an annex, as it was located in the corner of the property. Even though it was beautiful on the outside, it was all an illusion. The place was known as exile. Its only purpose was to completely exclude the youngest son from the outside world, leaving him without any servants or family members to support him. That was the true rose garden. Jack was startled when someone called out to him, saying they brought him something to drink. It was Ron, the butler, and also the only person in that place who took care of the boy. Softly, he remarked that the Ron he knew was a clever one. As he took the glass, the little one asked if there wasn't any poison mixed with the juice, which made the servant very nervous. But he quickly explained it was just a joke and thanked him for the care. That made Ron laugh, asking him not to overdo it, then leaving the boy alone afterward. There were 11 people in that garden, not counting the protagonist. One of them was the butler, but the other 10 were just guards constantly watching him. Besides the caretaker, he didn't think anyone else needed to be kept under watch, which gave him plenty of free time. The boy was sure that everything was real, but had no idea he would return to the past, and it had only been an hour since he found out he had gone back. It's not like he had a plan in mind or anything like that. Now he was 14 years old, and even so, he didn't have any calluses on his hands and didn't seem to have a mana heart or anything like it. If compared to other children from noble families, he was very inadequate. But there was a good reason for that. He didn't have mana yet at that time. While thinking, a man prepared to hit him from behind on the head. Suddenly, the boy felt unwell, confused about what was happening. He had let his guard down. That's when he remembered it had been many years since he got smacked on the head. The man commented that he shouldn't distract a dog while it's eating, observing the broken juice cup on the floor. His voice makes Jack tremble. The dark-haired man complained that he hadn't even greeted his older brother upon arrival. It was Phelan Valentier, his brother 3 years older and the second son of the Marquis family, and also the reason the MC couldn't train mana. Thanks to the abuse and threats from that jerk, he was extremely limited. The boy stared at him with hatred. Even after decades, the image of his brother wouldn't leave his mind. Flashbacks of a day when Phelan spilled a hot drink on his head came rushing back. He called him useless and said he should be wiped out. He shouldn't learn anything, fencing, magic, nothing. Because if he did, Phelan would take it as betrayal to the elder brother. And then, yes, he could destroy him with a good excuse. And he warned that as long as he lived in that house, he would only eat and wear what was given to him. Laughing, the scumbag suggested that might change if Jack obeyed him to the letter. Maybe then he could consider calling him his younger brother once he became a Marquis. Jack was extremely weak when he was younger, and he acknowledged that. After all, everyone in the house saw him as inferior. That's why he was called the disgrace of the house. Of course, he only got that nickname inside. If it leaked out, it would be even more pathetic. A sad excuse for the third son of a Marquis family. The sound of laughter even from the plebeians in his family echoed between them. That's how everyone treated him, and the people who led to all of it were the second son of the family and Count Mantis. It was ridiculous how Phelan behaved, especially since their firstborn wasn't a man, but a woman. She was the only member of that family he could trust and also the only one who cared about the boy. Unfortunately, even being a year older than the middle brother, she couldn't become the family successor because she was a woman. She was just the beautiful firstborn of the family who couldn't inherit the title. She was practically born with her fate written by someone else. She would have a political marriage with a family their father liked and then live trapped in a mansion forever to continue the family lineage. Those were the circumstances at the moment Jack returned, and that guy in front of him was the one who most wanted to use the girl. The son of a bitch who didn't want to be seen with the family's useless one, or be close to his younger sister near the royal court. He deserved to be destroyed at that exact moment, but Jack snapped out of his thoughts when Phelan commented on his eyes. Ready to hit the child, he asked how he dared look at him with that gaze. But before he could finish the action, the boy grabbed his wrist, bravely stopping him, which left him very surprised and alerted the garden guards because that kind of thing never happened. Still, Jack remained unshaken, determined not to go through those humiliations a second time. While the man freaked out, shocked at being blocked by someone he considered lower than an insect, our boy was swift and knocked the bully to the ground with a single blow. On the ground, Phelan asked what his brother thought he was doing. Mocking him, Jack asked if he wanted help getting up or something like that. Unsheathing his sword, the man was already emanating mana as he cursed the little boy with cruel names. The guards even considered stepping in to help, but that would only further displease the second young master, something the boy had already expected, to be honest. The whole situation felt like a big joke to him. However, before Phelan could do anything, Ron stepped between the two brothers to stop him, shouting for him to restrain himself and reminding him that he shouldn't use mana in a situation like that. But the man didn't care, punching the servant in the face to get him out of the way. He didn't care about anything. Watching it all, Jack remembered that Ron was a man with many secrets. Pointing a finger in the boy's face, he roared, "You arrogant brat, I'll finish you and that servant together." But the MC wasn't shaken. On the contrary, he retorted that his brother talked too much and asked if he wanted to fight with his mouth instead of his sword. When he finally drew the blade, Jack's eyes filled with hatred as he realized it wasn't just for show. Even without having trained yet and without Mana's help, he wasn't confident he would lose. So he charged at the man who looked tense at his attacks. His strength was at the third circle, and that was all he had. Even with that fancy sword, he was just a spoiled child. And considering his terrible technique, Jack doubted he could cut anyone. The protagonist wondered if he should just throw him to the ground already, but he didn't think that was enough. Smiling wickedly, he told Phelan that he needed a lesson to strengthen his mental power, making him nervous. The man didn't even know how to respond. Nothing came out of his mouth but random curses. When someone filled their body with mana like that, they were supposed to include the head too. Thinking that way, Jack shoved his hand into his brother's shameless face. He had no regrets. He knew it would only be fair to return 100% of the humiliation he had suffered because of that jerk. Each hit left Phelan more and more unbalanced. He ended up knocked to the ground like a coward. That indeed was his place. Jack even checked to see if he was still alive as the brother remained motionless. Everyone watched the boy's every move with nervousness and surprise, realizing Jack's unexpected strength. When he noticed that one of the guards was about to draw his spear, he quickly ordered them to stop, warning that if he didn't want to end up like the brother, he should follow orders. That was enough to make everyone back off, finding other tasks to do. With that settled, he returned his attention to the idiot falling to the ground, grabbing his hair. The boy dragged him across the floor, suggesting he lose a few pounds, since he was quite heavy to carry. Meanwhile, Phelan groaned in pain. They stopped at the edge of a fountain, and the protagonist commented on how hot the day was, asking if the older one wanted to cool off with his help. That's when he shoved the bastard's head into the water without a second thought. How surprised he must have been to not even be able to use that mana he was so proud of. During the torture, Jack reflected on everything that had happened to him because of that son of a bitch. Shortly after his sister had married for the sake of the Empire, Phelan eliminated their own father with a drink, taking his place to commit all kinds of atrocities. And the result was clear. As he failed to accomplish anything, the Volunteer Marcus family vanished without a trace. Even with all that, the MC had no interest in avenging his family, but he became furious remembering that he had wasted his sister's sacrifice. She was a smart woman with a refined nature. He couldn't even begin to imagine what she felt when she arrived at the Empire. The girl had gone of her own will, the glory of her family, and she must have understood the circumstances of it all. Because the man who took her was the 4th Imperial Prince, known for every kind of disgusting thing. And he told her even at the altar that she wasn't even the official wife, ordering the girl only to lower her head, obey his commands, and smile. Since his sister loved her family, she endured every kind of mistreatment, nodding to everything. If Phelan and their late father had known how she ended up, things would have been different. But Jack preferred not to dwell on it, so he wouldn't explode with rage. The bastard called to him amid the drownings, begging for his pathetic life like an insect. But Jack was already used to that scene after so many years as a monster. It was the expression that everyone who fell into the fear of death constantly wore. So he asked him to think about everything he had done up to that point, all the bad things and insults thrown at the boy. But he probably didn't even remember, suggesting that he ought to help him remember. That's why he should experience it directly. Only then would he understand the value of family. The younger brother's words frightened Phelan. Getting no response, the boy raised his fist, demanding he speak up willingly or not. Finally, the man admitted he was wrong, begging him to stop the torture. However, the child only hesitated when a third person made the same request. Standing at the gazebo, Ron pleaded for him to end it. His request made the boy grumble softly. Then he smashed his brother's forehead on the edge of the fountain before tossing him to the ground. The boy called one of the guards, who was startled by his voice, and ordered him to get rid of that dead weight of a brother regardless of what his final fate would be. Even if he wasn't finished off for good, he wanted him taken away and out of there. The knight ran toward the young master, concerned about his condition. As Jack passed by Ron, the butler's gaze fell on him as if he couldn't believe he was capable of all that. It didn't take long for rumors about his actions to spread, which turned the mansion upside down. Phelan was carried into the mansion by 2 servants, frightening a lady with purple hair who fainted at the sight of the hair's condition. Now the great hair of the Marcus family was lying in bed with an open wound on his head and an irrational fear of water. In that situation, it was to be expected that things would be out of place. Even with all the chaos, Jack retreated to his room. He savored a slice of cake as if nothing had happened, being closely watched by Ron. The servants whispered throughout the house, wondering how the boy managed to defeat his older brother, someone who had reached the 3rd circle at 17. While the MC didn't even know the basics of magic or martial arts, he could have been hiding his strength. But why choose to reveal it at that exact moment? Phelan was to be named next week after his coming-of-age ceremony, which suggested the boy might have coveted the position. The commotion was so great that even his sister was worried about the situation. When the information reached the Lord's ears, he promptly requested the presence of the 3rd son, who continued enjoying his cake, complimenting the delicious taste of the butler who had baked it with such care, until a maid called the servant, informing him of something that caught him off guard. Tense, he informed the boy that the Lord had requested his presence in the main building. Then the boy stood up, dismissing the butler's accompaniment, since he was no baby anymore. As an obedient servant, the blonde obeyed the order of his young master, asking only that he be careful. The palace was immense, and walking that far made him feel watched. It was strange, since it had been a long time since he had been ignored like that. Even if he didn't care how people saw him, he wished it would be over quickly. Upon arriving at the door, the guards immediately blocked his way. They were treating him as if he were invisible. Even though he thought it was absurd, the boy tried to get the guards' attention politely, but he had no success. He squeaked his foot under the legs of the two, asking if they couldn't see or hear him, while everyone watched the scene not so discreetly. If it were the Jack from the past, he would have left after seeing the disgusted look on the knight's face, but he wouldn't do that this time. Smiling, he told them to stop making that dumb face before he smashed them. That yes provoked a reaction from the guard, who wanted to make sure he had heard right. Then the boy kicked the bastard's knee, making him fall to the ground, and said he wouldn't ask twice. He explained that he had been summoned by the Lord, so he wanted to know why they weren't letting him in. The response came out in a trembling voice as the man said he couldn't say, which led him to conclude he had been made to wait out there for nothing. They probably expected a scene where they would say Jack wasn't worthy of being there and would only be allowed in after repenting, but the boy turned his back on the servant. When asked where he was going, he asked where else, leaving the guard speechless. Then Jack asked him to inform the Lord that if he had something to say, he could come to his quarters, because he wouldn't stay there for that nonsense. He had finally gotten angry. That's what the two concluded. One of the Lord's servants entered his office to inform him that the boy had left, apologizing for the situation. He gave a half smile upon hearing that, realizing the youngest had really changed. Meanwhile, in the rose garden, the boy had a snack, certain he'd receive a visitor soon. Something caught his attention on the horizon. Speak of the devil, there was the Lord, accompanied by his herd of servants and relatives as usual. It was written all over his face how stubborn he was. Jack couldn't help but laugh, because the man hadn't changed at all from what he remembered. He thought of his father as a ghost after all. A man had tried to end Jack in his previous life. He was the type of person who would hand his child over to a thug for power, because that's exactly what he had done. The man was hungry for powers beyond reach and lacked the ability to perceive his own ambitions. He welcomed the old man he could never call father. But the man wasn't interested in formalities, asking why he had done what he did. To which the boy responded with another question. He wanted to know what he was talking about. That sparked anger in the purple-haired lady, who screamed, asking how he dared speak like that to the Lord. Either way, Jack suggested they go inside to talk more comfortably, though they could stay out here if they preferred. Then, an absurd amount of mana poured out of the old man, who seemed to be checking whether the boy had secretly formed a mana heart. Concluding that wasn't the case, he commented that the boy had a knack for martial arts, and asked why he had hidden it until now. Although the real answer was, "You wouldn't believe me if I said I went back in time." All Jack said was that he didn't want to. The young woman starts barking again, calling him insolent and a mere son of a commoner. However, she goes silent when the Lord commands it, as he wanted to comment that the boy wasn't entirely useless, as he once thought. This sparks the protagonist's anger, who questions whether he wouldn't be his son if he were useless. He is asked if he wants the Marquis to recognize him as his son, but Jack isn't interested in such things right now. The old man turns around, saying he understood the youngest, and walks away. Jack watches them all leave. He doesn't understand why he came to meet him, only to leave without even getting slightly angry. Remembering his stepmother, the MC throws shade, saying that after what happened to her son, many wrinkles have shown up and she should take better care of herself. Her face burns with rage at such concern, making her nearly break her fan because of that insolent brat. A smile appears on Jack's face. The woman never helped him with anything, so seeing that expression was deeply satisfying. He stands up, bows, and asks them to send his regards to the second son, ironically of course. Back in his room, the butler announces, Jack Valantier, third son of the family, is sentenced to 20 days of solitary confinement for causing a commotion in the mansion. But suddenly, Ron hesitates and asks what happened while he was gone, and the MC tells him to be quiet so as not to distract him from his activities. He knew Ron would ignore him if Phelan beat him, so why was he mad now? Stopping his drawing for a second, the boy reflects on how interesting solitary confinement is. He had already been exiled to the Rose Garden, so he couldn't imagine what would be different in solitary. It would just be a room. Pulling him from his thoughts, the butler comments that there was less than a month left of the academy break, and he was already being confined. Jack freezes in confusion. He had completely forgotten about his studies since he'd been living a different life for so long. Now he's 14 years old, which means he must attend the Imperial Academy. All aristocrats of the Teslan Empire must study there. If you're not disabled, attendance is physically mandatory every day. It's 4 years of study, starting at age 14, so Jack was still in his first year. The first semester had ended, so summer break had begun. It was strange to think of himself as a student again. His master is directly connected to the academy. He could skip any class except hers. That's why he wouldn't waste any more time arguing with his father over nonsense. Thinking rationally, his only option was to go study. There were still 27 days left of vacation. 20 would be spent in prison and 6 days traveling from there to the school. In other words, he'd be sent to study immediately after prison. Even though it was his past, it was hard for him to understand himself. With a tired look, Ron asked if the young master had finished painting. Jack stood from his chair, touched the easel, and asked where his confinement would be. The servant's silence quickly irritated the MC, and he repeated the question. Then the blonde explained that there was only one place for the condemned, the prison for criminals who had committed offenses within the Marquis domain. Jack was stunned. He confirmed uncertainly, "I'm going to be thrown in prison?" The answer was yes, which wasn't exactly a surprise. Even so, a cry of frustration escaped him. He couldn't believe that stupid old man was actually capable of that. The Academy's vacation wasn't a break, but an extension of something else. That was clear from Phelan's condition. Before that, he attended social events and met with other noble families. That's how he met the vassals, even. Jack never had any of that. Of course, he wasn't interested in the Marquis' affairs, but what his relatives said enraged him. It was as if there were no place for him there or anywhere else, and now he was locked in a dirty cell. All because of that idiotic old man. The boy decided to go to prison alone without waiting for an escort, so he wouldn't completely destroy his dignity. Ron's face as he watched him go was inexplicably pitiful. He wiped tears with a handkerchief and looked at Jack like an abandoned kitten, while the MC just asked them to hurry up. In a way, he was still different from other prisoners. He had a bed, a bathroom, and 3 meals a day. But what's the point of all that when you're locked in a small, cold cell with a blanket that hasn't been changed in half a century, and food so disgusting and bland that not even the flies would eat it? Our boy crosses his arms. There's way too much time to think in tired days, and that's too much for a teenager. Aristocrats with land could punish residents however they pleased using local laws instead of imperial ones. In fact, within their territories, they had the same rights as the ruler of the empire. Jack might have been imprisoned by order of the Marquis, but he was still the son, and therefore an aristocrat. It wasn't like he had instigated a rebellion or anything, but the Lord decided to imprison his own son anyway. He wondered how his father would cover up this incident on behalf of the second son. He could claim Jack used poison or some other forbidden artifact, but that would be a bit excessive. Surely the Marquis had already created a good story to justify Flayn's condition. Something like, Jack Galantier, the disgrace of the house, learned forbidden magic out of greed. Then your second son, Flayn, who discovered this, tried to correct his younger brother. But the boy was too stubborn. Worsening the situation, Jack used forbidden magic on his brother to silence him. Even while suffering, the Hare had the nobility to forgive his stupid younger brother. That scenario was probably already playing in the minds of the Marquis and the Marquesa. Just thinking about it was disgusting. For the MC, it was fine to stay there a few days, but he couldn't waste his precious vacation in a place as mediocre as that prison. It's not like he had any love for his house. He could run away now, but he wouldn't do it yet for 3 reasons. His sister, Ron, and most importantly, his master. Oh, and of course, since he had returned to his original body, the MC was just a 14-year-old boy without muscles and too weak to survive on his own. He wasn't foolish. He knew the survival rule in that world. The strong devour the weak. The strongest survive, the weak become food or fertilizer. Jack didn't intend to cause a bloody massacre like in his past life, but he still needed to take revenge on many people. To do that, he would need 2 things, time and power, and the Academy would solve both in a snap. He could gain more time to regain his former strength, increasing powers that were already significant due to his past life experience. By achieving this, he would be able to protect his loved ones, Ron, his sister, and his master. To reach that, he had to take what was rightfully his, even if he didn't like it. Slowly, mana began to form in his hands. A mana user can be divided into 10 ranks. From the 1st to the 3rd circle were beginners, from the 4th to the 6th, specialists, and from the 7th to the 9th, high circle mana users, and the rarest ones, those in the 10th circle, were called masters or superhumans. Pressing his palms to his chest, Jack formed a blue glow. It was a good thing no one was there to witness what he was doing. It took only 2 hours to create the first circle, which made him celebrate being young. In his past life, he had started studying mana at 17 years old, maybe due to the impatience teenagers have with everything. He raised his hand, letting it hover above him, amazed by his creation. But he quickly waved it away, remembering that no one could know what he was doing there. A strange sound came from the hallway, similar to the click of the Marques's shoes. The boy wrapped himself in the blanket and pretended to be asleep, but soon realized this sound wasn't as heavy as usual. The voice he heard belonged to someone who, in his past life, he had only seen in very old memories, and it made him jump up quickly. On the other side of the bars, his tearful sister, Elizabeth Valantier, waited for the boy. She reached her hands through the bars and asked anxiously if the boy was very hurt. Tears streamed from his eyes upon seeing that his beloved sister was still beautiful and kind-hearted and had come to visit him under those circumstances. When she called him Jackie, it was like music to his ears, a nickname he hadn't heard in years. He pressed her hand to his face and smiled as he told her he wasn't hurt and everything was fine. Worried, Elizabeth asked why the boy had used forbidden magic, since she had offered to teach him magic whenever he wanted. Their hands intertwined as he apologized, but his sister changed the topic, asking why the MC had returned home early. Receiving silence from her younger brother bothered her. as he froze up. So she asked if everything was really okay and if the boy could hear what she was saying. But all he did was wipe away the tears and smile, explaining that he was happy. His action left Elizabeth confused. How could he be happy in a situation like that? In a cold, filthy cage, completely alone. And Jack revealed that he was very happy that this was real after dreaming so much of seeing his sister again. His words made the girl sure the boy had gone completely mad, but he grew serious and got her attention. Then he made the suggestion he had always wanted to: should we run away? Which surprised the girl. Still, he continued, suggesting they go to a nomad forest where they could start their own farm while cultivating together. Dryly, the woman scolds him. However, Jack insists. He knew how Phelan and the Marchioness treated her. It's better to leave everything behind and live in peace. They might even find someone who truly loves her. When he returns to talking about starting a farm and speaking ill of the Lord, he is interrupted by a shout from Elizabeth. She cuts him off with a scream, asking him not to say those things about their father, as that would still be his title no matter what happens. To the young woman, the two of them were born from the old man's deep love for her mother, so they couldn't speak about him like that. She knew Jack despised him deeply, but she was willing to change the Lord's opinion of her little brother, so she asked him to hang in there a bit longer. All Jack says is that he was truly happy to see his sister after so long, making her blush. He stands and asks her to step away from the bars, which she does, even though confused. When she obeys, the boy gathers mana in his hand, leaving the young woman stunned and bombarding him with questions about his hidden powers. Jack manages to break the lock and opens the cell gate, stepping out to hug his sister tightly. Tearful, he offers a sincere apology, saying he was truly sorry for everything. She grabs his shoulders, worried. That behavior was very strange, and it made her question whether the little one was really feeling well. Our boy smiles, confirming that he was doing just fine. As they embrace, he states that everything would be different this time, and she wouldn't have to sacrifice herself because he would work so Elizabeth could do whatever she wanted. But the noble remembers that soon he would meet the fourth prince. In his past life, that prince took his sister. At the time, she didn't know what awaited her. It was that bastard who turned Jack into a true monster, and flashes of the tortures he was forced to carry out resurfaced in his mind. He remembered how he captured the monarch, chaining him to a torture table. The rage burned his face, and he was sure he would never forgive the Tulkun Empire for what they did to his sister. In his past life, Jack ran away from home at 17. 10 years later, many things had changed. The Taslan kingdom had vanished, and his home had also been destroyed. Tulkun had become the greatest empire, ruling over the entire western continent, and House Valantyr survived only briefly. Memories of his sister, who was still alive, came to mind. At the time, she was the wife of the fourth imperial prince of Tulkun, and she begged for mercy from her family. But she was not a legitimate wife, and the idiot shoved her after hearing her plea, telling her not to bother him with that sort of thing. Even so, Elizabeth never lost her kind heart. She remained on her knees around the palace, begging him for 3 days and 3 nights, until he generously decided to grant her request. At least that was the first version of the story, which spread across the continent from north to south. But the truth behind this generosity was horrifying. Elizabeth constantly expressed her gratitude, for she didn't really know how to thank him properly. However, the prince pinned her against the wall, suggesting she was misunderstanding the situation, and told her not to mess with him, as he could destroy her house whenever he wanted, and the only reason he hadn't was because the time wasn't right yet. In return, she got to act exactly how he wanted. The prince controlled her like a puppet. He turned her into a toy for his twisted desires, like a servant. For some torturous reason, the legitimate wives of the idiot gnawed with envy at the situation, until he got tired of her, throwing her into an annex room of the house, left alone and scared by the legitimate women. At that same time, the house of Marchioness Valantyr was destroyed. So when Jack finally returned, he only found ashes where his home once stood. After hearing the full story, he became a true monster. He vowed to destroy the Tulkun Empire and everyone even slightly connected to it. First, he annihilated the Empress and the Princess, the wives of the princes, until he destroyed all the families that supported them. He didn't stop until no one was left. He wouldn't risk leaving even the smallest trace of them alive in that world. Now back in the present, Jack looks at Elizabeth in the cell, certain that he wouldn't let that happen again. But the girl had no idea about any of this, only worried about her little brother, asking him to take care while she spoke with her father, to which he responds with a nod, assuring her he would take care. This time he would do whatever was necessary. She leaves, but her thoughts are troubled. Her little brother had changed a lot. Usually he didn't do anything wrong and avoided others. Now there was a confidence in him she had never seen before, a new opportunity. And the magic he used was impressive. Even as a 6th circle user, she couldn't sense any traces of dark magic. However, her father possessed the 7th circle, which indicated that something was very wrong for him not to notice his son's power. Elizabeth enters her father's chambers, finding him drinking tea, and asks him to release Jack, as he had not learned forbidden magic. She thought that kind of magic was just a legend, so there was no way a little boy who knew nothing could access it. His imprisonment must have been a facade to avoid revealing it to the public. She argues that Jack had no interest in the heir title, and her words provoke the Lord. And the girl continues, stating that it wasn't just a punishment for her brother, but a warning to herself. Her words catch him off guard. He didn't expect his daughter to be so clever. The life of a mere tool to ease the lives of the Markwises trapped the girl in a fate she knew well. Indeed, it was a warning for her. A warning of what would happen to Jack if she did something foolish or rejected her own destiny. The Lord states that Jack has no place in that family, so when he comes of age, he will announce his death and send him away under a different identity. Elizabeth freezes. She had seemed encouraged by her father's kindness. However, he makes a point: don't forget your own duty until then. The same goes for the future. She understands, staring at the old man's cruel watchdog. The Lord comments that he couldn't understand how the boy, with no circle, managed to defeat the second son, who was of the third circle, leaving the girl nervous. What did he mean, no circle? In that case, what had she seen earlier in the prison? But the matter is closed by the man, who states that he will release the boy as she asked. With that settled, she asks for permission to leave and thanks him for the favor. Upon closing the door, she breaks down. She remembered Jack's invitation to run away together, knowing it was impossible. Her legs no longer support her, so the girl collapses to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. The morning sun illuminates Jack's face. The night was full of dreams about events from his past life. Maybe it was because of the new room he slept in. However, he can't reflect much as he sees a guard opening his cell to announce that he was being released. Jack stands up, sarcastically commenting that he was starting to like the new room. The guard holds his clothes, prompting the boy to thank him for the kindness. However, when refusing to return his shoes, the servant claims there were no shoes available for him. The attitude makes the MC lose his patience, yelling at the guard, asking if he thought they were friends or something. He hesitates, trying to make amends, but it's too late as Jack already concentrates a large amount of mana in his fist. Then the child attacks mercilessly to teach his servant a lesson. Sometime later, the boy gets dressed to return to the palace, and he is received by Ron, always cheerful, who runs toward him as soon as he sees him in the garden. His eyes are full of genuine concern as he inspects the young master for injuries. Noticing the ink stains on his clothes, he becomes even more worried, but the boy tells him to relax as it wasn't his blood. However, his gaze soon shifts to the guards patrolling the property in greater numbers than usual, and the butler explains that 10-foot soldiers and a squire from the Order of the Iron Blood Knights were assigned to the Markwises. Among them, one Iron Blood squire stands out, his gleaming armor contrasting with his grim expression. "Poor guy," mutters Jack, analyzing the warrior. A knight with such potential reduced to a spoiled noble's babysitter. He certainly didn't imagine that when deciding to become a knight. Noticing his tense stare, the MC concludes that the blonde man probably already knew what had happened for him to be in prison earlier. The knight then approaches, making a respectful bow to the young master, and wastes no time in asking if he could share what happened in the prison, if it wasn't too much. This makes Jack's jaw drop. The guy was much more polite than he expected. The blonde man adds, explaining that he had just read a report stating the boy had ripped off a guard's fingers and right eye. Ron, outraged, intervenes immediately, insisting that there was no way the third young master could do something like that. However, the knight insists, stating that even so, he had the right to know why he attacked his colleague. Jack interrupts with a dry laugh, cursing him, which offends the squire. "Right," he repeats, as if the word were an insult to his person. His eyes scan the knight, evaluating every detail to estimate what circle he was in, probably the fourth. So he confesses that he expected a dog of the mantis to know its place. The blonde man retorts, complaining that his words were too harsh, but the boy doesn't understand what's so harsh about calling someone a dog, and Ron scolds him. Already irritated, Jack explains that the only function he had there was to stay nearby and keep watch over him. He could do all sorts of things, even cleaning by himself, using all the time he needed, but he shouldn't talk to the MC about rights. And since he knew if he wanted to become a knight, he suggests that he stay in his place and pray not to cause any trouble. The knight lowers his head in submission, asking the boy for forgiveness. The bow brings a smile to the boy's face, who celebrates his new, well-trained dog. Satisfied, he turns his back, ending the conversation and telling the squire to report what he concludes after resolving all that mess. And if he had any complaints, he should speak directly with the Marquis. Additionally, he adds that his new nickname would be Chick, and he should come running when Jack called him that. Finally, he and Ron head back into the palace, leaving the Chick there in complete silence. Hearing a growl in his stomach, protagonist tells the butler he really wanted to eat some meat if possible. Therefore, the servant affirms that he will fulfill his wishes immediately. An incredible meal is prepared just for the boy, filling the MC's belly, making him praise Ron's talent in the kitchen. Noticing the tension on the man's face, Jack asks him to say what he wants to say and stop staring at him like that. But Ron still hesitates. The boy offers some meat to the blonde man, suggesting they eat together innocently. However, the butler can't accept, questioning how he would dare share a meal with the young master, who tells him to sit down already and stop at the speech because there was something they needed to discuss. So the man yields, sitting at the table with the young master. Straight to the point, the MC asks about his sister's condition, to which the servant responds by saying Elizabeth was the same as always. His eyes shine like those of a defenseless child, even though his words are sharp as he makes sure Ron wasn't an idiot, and that, of all the people there, he should know very well how much his sister was suffering, making the man tremble. Still, he continued the narrative that he wasn't aware of anything being interrupted by the boy. He repeats the compliments about the taste of the food, recalling that he could eat without worries during childhood thanks to the butler, who always checked if there was poison in any of the ingredients. The fact that he knew this is surprising to the butler, but the MC wasn't done yet. Another good reason was that the man was an immense circle mage. Once again, he is caught off guard by the things the protagonist knew. Then the boy continues, "As someone who stayed by my mother's side, you must know. But I don't know what my biological mother was like since she died when I was born." However, seeing how everyone commented on the similarities between her and Elizabeth, Jack concludes that she must have been a very good person. That's what he truly believed. The boy confirms that Ron protected his mother from the shadows and her escort was an immense circle mage. If this were a novel, the boy would have thrown the book away due to the lack of realism, but this was reality. He remembers when he ran away from home in his past life, accompanied by the butler while being pursued by people sent by his father. The rain that night was intense, making everything even more tense. Those pursuers were probably members of the Iron Blood Knights Order, just like the chick from earlier. The Marquis had sent them to eliminate his own son. At the time, the captain was a ninth circle swordsman, and Ron sacrificed himself to protect the protagonist, emanating an absurd amount of mana against the pursuer. Jack explains that when that happened, he feared the man after learning that he was the ninth circle mage who had accompanied his mother. But he knew the woman wasn't exactly a commoner, something the Marquis didn't know, perhaps not even the butler knew. In that case, the boy concludes that he'll continue living without knowing, since the kind of person the servant was in the present was all that mattered. After that whole spiel, the man asks what the young master wanted from him, and he explains that he only trusted him and his sister, so he wanted him to protect her. His request is strange since Elizabeth had reached the sixth circle at only 18 years old, which meant she was very capable of protecting herself. However, Jack counters, saying that she was very kind and the type of person who didn't mind making many sacrifices. But a life of sacrifice wasn't ideal for the girl, it was ideal for the Marquis. He informs that he will go to the academy early the next day and won't return unless something very serious happens. He would stay at the institution for 4 years and needed someone to stay with his sister during that time. After that, Ron could do whatever he wanted with his life. Downcast, the man asks what he meant by his life. Jack explains that he wasn't referring to the life he led hiding behind him, but to discovering what he truly wanted to do. However, the servant becomes curious about why he would spend exactly 4 years at the academy, and the boy says that only after that would he be able to protect Elizabeth by himself. When asked from whom he would need to protect the girl, the MC is interrupted by a third person entering the room. Even in such an important moment, he couldn't simply send the person away. It was the chick announcing that he would deliver his report. The guard had already received first aid and was being sent for treatment. Hearing that, he pretends to care, which only encourages the blonde man to whine more, saying the guy had accidentally cut his fingers while training and then dropped the dagger, which pierced his eye. At the end, the MC congratulates him on the good work, asking if the Marquis' little dog wanted a bone, which the man refuses. He calls him Chick, being corrected by James Canta, who finally says his name, but the boy didn't care at all, and says he wanted to learn fencing, so he needed a real sword and a wooden one. However, the squire refuses with all the pride of a knight, stating he wasn't a messenger boy. Jack calls him Chick again before asking if he didn't like him. Smiling, he explains that this was the perfect chance to beat him up. His words make Ron jump from his seat, while James asks if he was serious, receiving a yes as an answer. The rascal even shows his teenage hands, arguing that they had never held a sword before, so the man could hit him as much as he wanted in a duel. To make sure he heard right, the squire asks if the boy wanted him to be his fencing teacher. But Jack bursts out laughing, commenting that this was the third funniest thing he'd ever heard, and tells him to fetch the swords already. When James leaves, the butler asks if the boy would be okay fighting an opponent of the fourth circle, but that doesn't seem to bother the MC. He was worried he might get hurt, but his confidence was so great that he proposed a bet. Ron considers the possibility carefully, and suggests betting on how many hits Jack would take instead of betting on who would win or lose, which seems like a good idea to the young man, who asks what they would wager. Even though he showed confidence, Ron insists on reminding him that the squire was in a completely different league, making sure he would really go through with it. He didn't trust his skills one bit. In that case, the MC suggests the butler would win the bet if he took even one hit from the chick. His offer surprises him. What do you mean, just one hit? Moreover, the boy wanted the loser to fulfill a wish of the winner. This makes the blonde man a little sad for a moment, stating that if the boy wanted something from him, all he needed to do was give the order. After all, he was the mansion's servant, but hearing that only made Jack more eager to have fun at the poor guy's expense. The boy speaks up, pointing at the man and reaffirming that he only trusted him and his sister, but all Ron says is that it's rude to point with a fork. However, his gaze betrayed how much he was enjoying the situation, complaining while he was jumping for joy inside, and the MC comments on that. Putting on his most innocent face, the boy explains that he didn't give orders to people he trusted. He only asked favors, and that's what he wanted from the butler. The servant's eyes shine, saying that if he asked like that, it would be hard to refuse anything he wanted. Their conversation is interrupted by James, who returns to the room on his knees to apologize for his earlier rudeness, and asks the protagonist to reconsider what he said. There were countless people like the chick who disrespected Jack even in his presence. But an indirect humiliation like that and laying hands on him were very different things, which made him conclude that the guard was afraid of what could happen. That's why he was kneeling and saying all that. The boy asks if he wanted to go somewhere the two of them wouldn't be watched, confusing him. With an air of superiority, he suggests that the squire was afraid of losing to a teenager. His expression changes upon hearing that, and he turns his head in denial, but the boy insists. "So you're sure you're going to beat me up, huh?" he says while observing the blonde's attentive face, which said it all. Of course he was sure. Even in his silence, Jack asks Ron if he knew a place where they could train alone, shocking the servant. He couldn't lie to his master, so he reveals the perfect place for that. It was a hidden basement at the back of the mansion. The place was filled with neatly organized weapons and training equipment. Upon arriving, Jack asks if the butler trained in that space, which he denies, explaining that his mother had prepared the room for her two sons. This makes the young man ask why he didn't know about it in that case, and the servant says it was because he didn't train, which made sense. Thinking about it, even if it hadn't been used before, everything was shining. Someone probably cleaned the place regularly. Smiling at the butler, Jack thanks him for taking care of the room, and the man also seems pleased with his own work. Finally, his attention turns to the chick, who trembles at being called, and extends his hand to ask for the wooden sword. Even though the blonde was hesitant, the boy pressured him without stopping. Then he hands over the weapon carefully, and his voice still comes out trembling. His gaze turns to the squire, who comments that the protagonist seemed a bit experienced in holding a sword. The comment makes him smile wickedly. If he stacked all the living beings he destroyed in his past life, he could reach the heavens. He thanks him for the compliment and tells the knight to take the fight seriously, even if the swords are wooden. The two begin the fight, and Jack can't hit his opponent, who easily blocks and dodges the blows, feeling confident. However, with precise movements, the MC places the tip of his wooden sword against the knight's throat. The man freezes, not understanding how he was defeated so easily. Ron shouts to get the young master's attention, who is too focused, warning the chick that if that had been a real weapon, he'd be dead. He wanted him to take the fight seriously, which clearly hadn't happened. The blonde says nothing, shocked by the boy's skill in fencing, questioning whether that was really his first time holding a sword. Even Ron was scared by what he had just seen. Just seconds ago, the young master lunged and the knight had easily struck him to the side. Even though it was a light hit, for someone 14 years old, it shouldn't have been weak. According to his expectations, the boy should have ended up on the ground, defeated and disarmed. But instead, the brat moved with perfect form, perfect attacks and dodges. If it had been a real blade, James wouldn't have stood a chance. He didn't know what had happened to Jack. Beyond fencing, he had never held a sword before. Could he be some kind of sword genius or something? No, even a genius wouldn't be that skilled. While lost in thought, the teenager confirms that the squire was in his 20s, and he replies that he was 23, prompting the MC to ask when he started training with mana. It was at 18. The news makes him smile like a maniac, faking excitement as he asks if the blonde reached the 4th circle in 5 years. That was quite talented, considering how late he had started. Observing his internal mana, he concludes that the squire could easily reach the 8th circle, which would open many doors for his position in the guard. Without saying another word, the boy drops the wooden sword to the ground and asks James questions. He grabs a real blade this time, thinking how funny it was to waste such talent on being a babysitter. Then he says he was starting to like the guy. Seeing the blade in his hand, the adult warns him he could get hurt, something Jack strongly disagreed with. This makes him burst out laughing, until he takes on a serious posture like a psychopath, and explains that there's a clear difference between arrogance and confidence, asking if he believed what had just happened was just a lucky coincidence. The blonde is left speechless, even as he feels his blood boil. "That's why you're just a chick. This time you come to me," Jack says, calling the man to the second round. By this point, the man is already grinding his teeth in anger, doesn't hesitate to charge. His reaction only made it clearer how weak he was to fall for such a provocation. Once again, James loses his sword and his chin meets the tip of the young master's blade, who smiles sweetly, saying that apparently it was his second loss of the day. He couldn't understand how the brat did that, angrily demanding an explanation. But he just plays dumb, explaining that he had merely changed the direction of the sword at the moment their blades crossed. Still, the man insists on knowing exactly how he did that. Showing off, Jack claims it was an advanced technique and asks if he wanted to see it again. Despite feeling less and less confident, the knight grabs a real sword so they can battle again. Meanwhile, the protagonist confirms with Ron that he had won the bet, and he nods, asking the master to tell him what he must do. Our boy explains that his request was the same as earlier, protect Elizabeth, and he wanted to be sure the servant could actually do it. The man freezes but confirms that he would risk his own life to make it happen. Back to the chick, the man says this time would be different, making Jack prepare with the sword while channeling mana since the opponent had mana too. Still, the blonde insists he go all out. On the first strike, James is blocked instantly. The young man's mana penetrates his skin, causing intense pain that brings him to the ground. With the man on the floor, Jack makes a point of stepping on his chest to observe his frightened face. Even without much strength left, he asks how a first circle like the MC could have so much power. It was a reasonable confusion since a mere first circle had defeated him, but the explanation was simple. Instead of the usual means of evenly distributing mana throughout the body to enhance general physical abilities, our boy focused on one region. Ignoring the question, Jack asks if the squire really wanted to become an official knight, but the man doesn't understand. Wasn't he already official? Trying to understand, the man asks what exactly the boy meant. Then Jack makes an unexpected proposal. He wanted the blonde to become a loyal hunting dog. James seems offended by the offer, but the MC insists, stating that if he became a dog that only followed his orders, he'd have a much better life than as an official knight. The knight hesitates, clearly torn between duty and curiosity, so he asks what he would gain if he accepted the position, disappointing Jack, who grumbles that he wasn't even interested in knowing what he'd have to do. Trying to overlook the blonde's awful personality, MC assures him he'd have power and authority if that's what he wanted. Now, regarding his duties, it was all very simple. He just had to eliminate anyone who stood in his master's way and cause harm. The boy's cold explanation leaves both James and Ron in shock, and the first thing the knight asks is who he would have to annihilate. Jack says the target was obvious, referring to Phelan, who was still bedridden. However, he gave him a day to think about the proposal. After the training, the young man was in his room with Ron, and the servant couldn't help but ask if he wasn't being a bit reckless in trusting James. But he disagreed, prompting the man to warn that what was said earlier could reach the Marchioness's ears. The boy laughs, only to be quickly scolded, since the Marchioness seemed to be just waiting for a chance. If she found out that Jack was leaving the next day for the academy, she wouldn't let it happen and might try to get rid of him. Even with all that, the MC is unconcerned. He knew that she might even want to hurt him, but she wouldn't. Since the incident with Phelan, his older brother had been afraid of water. The woman was waiting for her chance, but she was too busy. He had to keep his eyes open for her and the Lord, conditioning Elizabeth into submission. In such a delicate situation, it was impossible for her to finish him off. Ron seems conflicted, as he keeps insisting on knowing whether the boy was really sure about that. Jack replies by asking if he really thought the Marquis would let the woman do such a thing. He couldn't go anywhere other than the academy, so how could she possibly destroy him? She'd probably stop after causing a fracture or two. Besides, a mere Marchioness wouldn't be capable of such a feat. So many superior creatures had tried before, and even they failed. It was almost funny how out of touch it was. With the matter closed, Jack thanks the servant for the massage, and Ron, tired of arguing, simply says, "You're welcome." The little one gets his attention and says his day would only come when he wanted it to, worrying the servant, who asks if he was planning to swipe up to leave. He laughs, saying that in a way, yes. But Ron doesn't find it funny at all. Jack tells him to follow him secretly if he's really curious about what will happen the next day, which catches the servant by surprise. He thought he would accompany the young master, but there was no chance of that happening. So much so that he makes the butler promise not to be seen. Before leaving the room, Jack informs him that he will be forming the second circle in his room, so no one can interrupt him. Ron is confused, second circle, and asks if that wasn't supposed to be something hard to do. But for our boy, it was quite simple. Even unconvinced, the servant just says he'll do as requested. Wandering the castle, James couldn't get the fight with the brat out of his head. With those skills, he had to be a third circle. He might even be a genius, but his proposal to turn him into a guard dog was absurd. It's not like he had the mantis backing like his brother, and he didn't have any vassals supporting him. No, the third young master has nothing. Remembering the boy's words about having a much better life didn't help at all. James admits he had been too easily swayed by the words of a child who knew nothing. He should tell the Marchioness everything, from Jack's martial talent to what they discussed in the basement. Among the mansion's maids, the blonde smiles, thinking this would be the perfect opportunity to stand out to the Marquises. No matter how much of a genius the brat was, he wouldn't beat the Marquis house unless he were a monster. Meanwhile, in Elizabeth's room, the girl hears that her mother, just some commoner, gave her a one-time opportunity. The Marchioness claims there's nothing remarkable about being talented, because as long as she's Noah's daughter, nothing about her is interesting besides her face. She remains silent, clearly hurt by the woman's harsh words. Offering a glass of wine, the woman comments that the girl was such a sweetheart, asking her not to be shy about accepting the drink. Elizabeth immediately refuses, explaining that she can't drink in front of the Marchioness. Shrugging, the witch downs her glass in one gulp and keeps talking, saying the son of Duke Malone and of Assemble seemed interested in her. But she quickly interrupts herself and corrects. The middle son definitely wouldn't be good for her. The Marchioness states that she'll find a much better match And in the meantime, the girl should take very good care of herself and behave. Suddenly, she asks if Elizabeth is interested in someone, something the girl quickly denies. That makes the lady smile with satisfaction, explaining that if there were someone, he would have to disappear without a trace. Then she starts rambling about her younger brother because it seemed like he was thinking of something quite interesting. The mention of Jack unsettles the girl, who doesn't understand what her stepmother is talking about. She knows about Jack's conversation with the knight and says that her brother tried to recruit the knight to his side. But she didn't expect James had been supported by her second son for a long time. Elizabeth shrinks in her chair upon hearing those words, while the woman laughs like a lunatic. To think he tried to eliminate me with someone like that. His stupid idea is so hilarious. Suddenly, the Marchioness lets out an evil laugh. The young girl's expression wilts and she blames the parents for Jack having these thoughts. But she knew she had to hold herself back or their hatred for the boy would only worsen. After laughing until her belly hurt, the woman calms down and turns to Elizabeth and ends the subject by reaffirming that she'll continue searching for good marriage partners for her. However, there was something she still needed to say, even if it was just out of concern. Wrapping her arms around the girl's neck, she threatens her. If you start getting involved with someone in secret, you know very well how that will end. The girl trembles with fear. All she can do in response is whisper that she understands. Her submission delights the hag, who praises her before leaving, reminding her she should get ready for dinner. Downcast, Elizabeth simply agrees with her second mother. As night falls, the maids begin preparations for dinner. In a few moments, the members of the Valentier family gather at the table to enjoy the meal. However, the dining room door opens abruptly, startling everyone. It's Jack entering the room uninvited and bold enough to ask why everyone looked like they were at a funeral. All eyes turn to him. His sister is in shock and everyone else is filled with pure disdain, especially his father. With fake innocence, the boy argues that, as the precious third young master of the family, there should be a free chair for him to sit in. A few minutes earlier, he had been focused on training his mana manipulation. There were two types of mana circulation, one that affected physical abilities. In other words, it enhanced intelligence, senses, and especially strength. The second way was injecting mana into a systematic formula and materializing it. Things like fireballs, ice arrows, and hellfire were good examples of this method. Ron was a ninth circle mage, while James was a fourth circle swordsman, and depending on how you use your mana, you could be either a mage or a swordsman. Jack was a swordsman, but that didn't mean he couldn't use magic. In fact, there he was, emanating mana while sitting on the bed. The butler looked at him in astonishment, but he soon informed the boy that it had taken him 2 months to master the second circle. It was something impressive, considering it usually takes several months for a first circle guy to reach the second. Unless you were a regressor like him, it was a very difficult feat to achieve in 2 months. Smiling, he complimented the servant, saying he was incredible. This made Ron laugh, saying he didn't think he should be hearing that from someone who became a second circle mana user in just hours. Speaking of time, the boy asked what time it was, and the servant replied it was 5:48 in the afternoon. He jumped up, surprised by how much time had passed. Since it was dinner time, he wondered if he should cook a steak like always, but quickly discarded the idea, because his arrogant family was probably in the main dining hall stuffing their faces. So he decided he would dine like a noble, which Ron thought was madness. But the boy lied, using the excuse that he was going to tell them he would be leaving the next day. Back in the room, Jack was already devouring a chicken leg, drooling over the delicious food of the main house. The scoundrel even commented that it was tasty, but not as good as Ron's cooking. That left the relatives furious. After stuffing himself, he thanked them for the meal. But his father called his attention to ask if he had come there to say something, and he confirmed, as he had no other reason to go to that shitty place. The insolent way he spoke made the Lord think his son had gone mad. Even so, the protagonist kept provoking, asking why his father was making that weird face. The tension between the two was obvious, and Elizabeth asked Jack to talk with her outside the room, saying she'd provide whatever her brother wanted, but the Marquis interrupted her. With everyone silent, he asked the kid to just say what he had to say. So he announced he would leave for the academy the next day because he couldn't stand that gloomy atmosphere. Even sulking, the Marquis approved the boy's decision, but Jack wasn't asking for any permission to leave. To avoid an argument, Jack admitted he was happy with his father's approval. With that out of the way, the MC felt comfortable enough to ask about his brother, who trembled when addressed. Holding his wine, he commented that he had heard Phelan couldn't even drink due to the water phobia he had developed, must be dying of thirst. And even though he was a brother who used to beat him when bored, the MC still considered him family. Maliciously, he poured the wine on the dinner table, saying that since it wasn't water, he should take a sip. Phelan freaked out at his brother's gesture, nearly falling out of his chair, and the Marchioness couldn't contain her anger, screaming that the boy was insolent and asking how he had the nerve to do such things. But Jack turned his back, stating that he had said what he wanted to say. To him, the woman's voice was like a barking dog. He left the room under a heavy silence, knowing his words would echo through that mansion for a long time. Full of hatred, the Marchioness assured the other family members that she would not let that disrespect slide, and the boy mocked her, saying he'd be waiting for it. The hysterical screams of the lady could still be heard from the other side of the door, cursing, determined to end that child. In the hallways, the maids whispered among themselves, trying to make sense of what they had just witnessed, but they tried to focus on cleaning the wine-stained tablecloth. Unlike the Marchioness's words, nothing unusual happened that night except for being scolded by Elizabeth. On the morning of his departure, Jack wondered how the preparations for the event could be so simple. Even with a luxurious exterior, there was nothing there except a comfortable place to sit. The march was commanded by a six-circle jerk knight named Rezan, who stared at the MC in a suspicious way as if he had some secret plan or something like that. Besides him, James was also included in the Uber package to the academy. Worried about her brother, Elizabeth checked if he didn't want company for the trip, but he dismissed her. The girl was very worried, since their second mother seemed to be plotting something, so she insisted on accompanying him. Since the boy was very stubborn, he asked her not to worry, and he stated that many things would change from that day on, and that he really was fine. Besides, now he knew that there was no way the family could destroy her. Downcast, the girl kept following him on horseback, which made the boy suggest she go back and ask how long she planned to keep following him. Finally, the girl gave in, asking him to be careful, and Ron watched her leave with suspicion. The butler was visibly nervous when he asked if the young master was really sure about his decision, since the atmosphere in the main house was horrible. He had the same expression as Elizabeth and received the same answers she did. Jack took the chance to remind him of the promise he made yesterday, something he was supposed to do that day during the night. There was no way the servant would forget. Along the way, Rezan watched the dude's interactions with suspicion. Upon receiving Ron's confirmation, the MC emphasized that he should take care of his sister, dismissing him so she wouldn't be left alone. And so he did, wishing him a good trip. The servant would follow the march from the rear and then see what would happen later that day. He wanted to treat it as a gift for the butler, who would always work hard in his favor. The cozy atmosphere made the boy yawn with sleep, so he decided to take a nap during the trip. But upon noticing the boy had dozed off, Rezan looked at him coldly, as if plotting something. The journey continued until nightfall, and he remained in deep sleep until noticing the dark sky. Jack got up to ask why no one had woken him earlier. Upon seeing the servants settling in, he concluded that they were going to camp in that spot. James approached the brat, which put him on alert, and the two stared at each other with intense tension until the boy smiled. Looking ahead, he commented that his little chick had really decided to tell everything to the Marchioness. He was surrounded by guards, so it wasn't like he could do anything about it now. Since he had already been captured, Rezan said there wouldn't be much small talk with the MC, but the brat told him to at least try a little because he would listen attentively. The silver-haired man seemed pleased to reveal that during the 4 days they would spend taking him to the academy, they would camp at night. However, Jack didn't see anything wrong with that isolated fact, until the man looked at him with a psychopath's gaze and said they would grind his bones into dust every night and give him a healing potion at the end of each one. When the explanation ended, the boy didn't seem surprised or scared and asked him to continue. Rezan explained that the Marchioness had ordered something else. The boy had created a mana circle and everyone there knew it by now. So the woman ordered him to destroy it, which put a smile on the bastard's face. That indeed caught his attention. Breaking a mana circle was like a death sentence. Even if it was possible to recreate the broken circle, the chance of regenerating mana was 1 in 1,000. As if that weren't enough, you could spend the rest of your life unable to walk due to the shock of having your circle destroyed. The bastard continued, saying he had already heard everything from James. Apparently, Jack didn't just have talent for mana, but with the sword as well. And he added that it might be impressive for other people, but in his case, it wouldn't matter, because the boy wouldn't change anything with just talent. Finally, he asked him not to resist, as it would only make things worse. The boy knew that atmosphere very well. It felt like he had returned to his origins while watching the others frightened. But he was the ghost of the sword, even if he had spent his days peacefully in this new life. The scars of his past had been deeply engraved in his heart, so he called the butler, and began telling how he spent 10 years imprisoned on the mountain, leaving the guards confused. Even so, he continued, saying he had met the master who taught him everything there. But everything changed when he came down. His family and the kingdom had fallen. Not that he gave a damn about his house's future, to be honest. So many meaningful words made the guards ask what he was talking about, something he didn't answer, but instead drew his sword, stating that he had something on his mind. And that was what happened to his sister, because Elizabeth was smart and talented, so he thought that at least she'd be lucky enough to find a husband, since she had no luck with her family. At the palace, the girl stared at the sky, thinking about her brother and trying to convince herself that he would be okay. If his sister had lived happily with someone she loved, she would have forgiven everything else. The men kept laughing, suggesting he had gone insane from the fear he was feeling, but there was no use resisting in that scenario. However, the boy kept approaching and said that revenge was sweeter than the guard thought, sweet enough to drive you mad. And he agreed with the guide, saying he couldn't do anything with just simple sword talent, convinced he could maybe endure Rezan's torture once. But generating all the mana around him, he declared that he could do a lot with his overwhelming talent and power. Filled with hatred, Jack said that from that moment on, he would show them exactly that. As fast as a storm, his mana circle expanded, yet the captain still asked what he could do with a pathetic little circle like that. However, he was stunned to realize that if he didn't stop that child in front of him, the entire guard would be finished. With violent winds that destroyed everything in their path, Jack launched a mana blast capable of annihilating an entire city toward the men. James hadn't regretted his decision up until that moment. Anyone would have chosen the second young master over the trash of the Valentier Marquis family. But in that moment, it was as if time had stopped, and the blonde felt that his life had come to an end. The boy managed to break his sword after the intense fight against all those men. Now he looked at them lying on the ground, completely powerless. He called for Ron to appear, and the servant did, stepping out from the bushes and asking what he had just witnessed. The two of them stared at the destruction the boy had caused in shock. Jack explained that that was one of the first 4 techniques out of a total of 8 sword techniques he had completed in a transcendent region, even if he didn't know what it all meant. Nervously, the servant said he might not know everything about the boy, but the scene looked more like the result of a mana application art than a sword technique. The protagonist faked surprise and changed the subject by asking the man to give him a potion, if he had one. However, Ron was startled to see the boy spitting strawberry juice. The boy was spitting rivers of it, yet still insisted it was nothing and just asked for the potion again. The butler pulled a flask from his coat, handing it quickly to the boy, who drank it all in one go, all while receiving a scolding from the servant, who warned that if he hadn't had a potion, the protagonist would have gone to food and drinks, meaning died. Even in a situation like that, Jack smiled, saying he had warned that wouldn't happen, because the man was always so well prepared for emergencies like that. Besides, he knew Ron would have used the potion on him instead of keeping it for himself. The reason he was so sure of all this was because a similar situation had happened in the past too. He remembered when he was lying in Ron's arms and the butler was the only one there for him. Now conscious, Jack started rambling about how both of them had been too busy running the past to say anything important to the servant. He looked at him with shining eyes and sincerely said, "Thank you very much." He regretted how hard it had been to say something like that, stating that his past self must have been really stupid. Hearing the boy's confessions, Ron concluded that knowing things about the future was the true secret of the third young master after all. And Jack explained that he had done time regression, something his companion was very familiar with. Then he got himself ready to get up from the ground. The boy was surprised by his condition, which was much better than before, indicating that the potion he received was high grade. He stood up completely, went to retrieve his sword and collect his coat. That was enough. But he took the chance to take one last look, confirming that the little chick was indeed destroyed. Stepping on his head, the MC confessed that he would really like to turn the blonde into a little messenger boy. Ron commented that you could say he had made a wise decision, but Jack disagreed, saying he hadn't had much hope in the guy from the start anyway. And he brought back the subject of time regression, asking if the butler wasn't curious about anything. He even tried to think of something that might make him curious, but nothing came to mind. The protagonist gave examples about what happened to his sister or to the Marquis family, but Ron had already imagined their fate, even if it was surprising. And just by seeing the teenager's reaction, he knew the process hadn't been pretty. Jack confessed that he could tell him, but would only do so if he showed a lot of curiosity. He teased him by asking what he thought, if he was curious, but the servant explained that wasn't exactly the case. That left the boy a bit annoyed, shouting for the man to stop being so dull. When asked about his own fate, Ron admitted he had his doubts, but supposed he would have survived either way. Awkwardly, the servant said he didn't think he was someone who would die prematurely, but was surprised by the protagonist, who made it very clear that that had been exactly how he met his end. That indeed was a surprise and left the man curious, but Jack asked him not to be disheartened by something like that. Ending the conversation, he entered the carriage, announcing that he was going to get a little rest. Lying down on the bench, the boy tried to relax while Ron approached one of the guards. Realizing he was still alive, he placed a hand on his head to knock him out for good. He analyzed whether it was really appropriate to call a weapon used in an attack that wiped out 25 high-level knights a sword. All the men had their hearts pierced, but it didn't seem like they had been stabbed with a blade, so he couldn't understand the source of the damage. The servant looked back at all the bodies on the ground and wondered what kind of life the boy had lived in the past, worried whether everything would really be fine in the end. After some time, Jack woke up startled and drenched in sweat, hearing Ron calling out to him. Ron asked if he was really okay, even though he had taken the potion. Realizing who it was, he opened up, explaining that he wasn't okay. He still felt a lot of pain, and the butler understood. He handed a bag to the boy, informing him that he had searched the knight's belongings and collected 5 high-grade potions, 63 gold coins, and 40 common coins. This surprised the teenager, who commented that even the mantis dogs carried absurd amounts of money. Noticing that he closed the bag, the servant asked if he wasn't going to drink the potions, but Jack explained it would be useless to drink one at that moment. And handing 3 more flasks to the servant, he said that was payment for the potion he had given him. Gladly accepting, it was as if his 1 high-grade potion had been transformed into 3 with a gesture. He asked what the boy would do with the bodies there, but Jack didn't plan to do anything. He would just leave them to be eaten or found by someone, which led the blonde to warn that people would become suspicious of Jack if he were the only one not among them. that surprised him and he asked who would be suspicious, but it was obvious he was referring to the Marquis. Only the protagonist already knew that even if his father suspected him, he couldn't harm him. Meanwhile, Ron argued that if he were in the Lord's place, he would want to summon him immediately to clarify things. Smiling, the boy asked if he wanted to bet on it, but the man declined as he already knew he'd lose again. After all, his master was too clever. Looking at the boy, the blonde knelt down, saying that despite all that, he believed there was something Jack truly believed in deep in his heart. Jack confirmed that no one else knew the man was there, which was true. To be completely sure of it, the mage explained that he had left behind an illusion at the palace, so it was probably still tidying up the annex at that moment. The illusion was a ninth circle spell that could be considered a clone, and those powerful enough to see through that kind of magic were currently unconscious. Changing the focus, the MC explained that the Marquis might wonder what had happened there today. So he asked that if the situation got ugly, Ron should tell him that it was Jack who did it. In the worst case scenario, if the Marquis seemed ready to tear him apart, he should say the following: "If you or my sister die, that will be the beginning of the destruction of the Marquis' house." The two stayed silent for a brief moment. Ron admitted he was getting nervous for no reason, and the boy burst into laughter, saying it was just a hypothetical situation. He didn't need to make such a serious face. For now, he could only hope the Marquis would act like a father to Elizabeth, as if giving her one last chance. Then the man asked if they really should go to the academy, and the boy confirmed, only to be bombarded with questions about his father's position on the matter. However, he didn't seem worried because even at the academy there were rules. Once the semester began there, unless the head of the house or someone directly related to him died, returning to the mansion was impossible. In that case, it was time for the servant to take his leave. From the look on the butler's face, it was clear he wished he could accompany the brat on his adventure. Which on one hand would be fun, but it still wasn't the right time. Thinking about that, the boy asked him to be careful of the monsters on his way back. Then the blonde asked if he would really only see him again in 4 years, something Jack also wondered about but didn't know for sure. However, regardless of that, he reaffirmed that the man should take care of his sister as he had promised. Now that he was without Ron, he needed to devise a new strategy. Considering they had to camp on the mountain 3 times from the Marquis's house to the academy, it would take 4 days by road, but also 4 more days hiking a trail. However, observing the path, he realized that the trail in question wasn't much different from a road. So he grabbed his suitcase, certain it was a sign that there was a village nearby. The protagonist mounted one of the horses, or at least tried to. Having a small body was a terrible thing, and it took him a long time to finally get on the animal. They continued the journey in silence on a night so peaceful that you wouldn't believe a violent battle had taken place just minutes earlier. Jack didn't plan to go directly to the academy. No, now his priority was his master, Valentine Milos. She was the one who allowed him to keep living, granting him enough power to get his revenge and turning him into a decent person. Despite having been forgotten, she was the one who reached the peak of forbidden magic, a summary of fear for those who remembered her. As he rode, he wondered how long it had been since his heart beat so hard for something. Arbelo, territory of Baron Arbelo, a vassal house symbol. Arriving in the city, the protagonist spotted an inn, wondering if he should spend the night there. In front of the establishment, 3 children were chatting cheerfully. Judging by their faces, it must have been a great place to live. Upon entering the inn, the boy found various types of people sharing a meal, along with a very cute dog. Petting the little animal, he sat at a table, hoping that no one there would pick a fight with him. As soon as he sat down, someone greeted him, commenting that it was the first time they had seen such a young customer alone there. It was a girl full of love to give, who asked if he wanted something to eat or a room to stay in. She didn't seem like an employee based on her clothes. In fact, she looked more like a mercenary than anything else. But the boy handed her 3 coins, asking for a light meal, a drink, and a room, and requested that she take the sword he had left near his horse up to the room. However, the woman took only 1 coin, saying it was enough, and informed him that she would bring apple pie and some meat too, since he was in his growing phase. With a kind expression, she asked if the child wanted to drink a bit of milk or maybe a beer, but embarrassed, Jack said milk would be fine. She turned around, asking him to play with Arnold the dog while he waited. It seemed like a good place to live, and the woman hadn't tried to cheek him, probably because the war hadn't started yet. The dog was very friendly, and Jack told him he didn't know what was waiting for him in the future. He sighed, just thinking about the possibility of living carefreely, unaware of anything, until something caught his attention from a bit of gossip among friends at one of the nearby tables. They were talking about how someone planned to eradicate demonic monsters with the help of countless mana users for this large-scale plan. One of them didn't understand why they would do something so unnecessary, saying even the Tulkan Empire was lowering itself over so little. The boy listened tensely as the blonde man expressed his dissatisfaction. The Marquess's elite superforce, the Iron Blood Knight Order, had been sent to the Demon Beast Forest for a subjugation mission. By order of the King of Teslin, who gathered private soldiers from every house in large numbers and decided to send them to subjugate the forest along with some mercenaries. The massive forest had a tall mountain range called the Grand Canyon as its base and was one of the neutral zones, even though it seemed like an ordinary place. That place was home to ogres, orcs, goblins, elves, and the Imiji, a serpent known for becoming a dragon. They used troll blood, ogre tendons, and entire monsters as materials to craft armor and weapons. Harpies' feathers became accessories and elves became pets for high-class ladies. The reason for trying to conquer a neutral zone like that forest was probably pure human greed. Besides that, the boy knew that the subjugation would fail completely. The Iron Blood Knight Order lost a third of its knights in that battle, and it was practically the same for the private soldiers of the other nobles. A terrible defeat that cost the king of the nation the support of the public and the nobles. That probably started the division within the kingdom, and later, the civil war broke out. The guy at the table shouted that the real problem was the king drawing attention. But his friends stopped him from continuing the speech, since they were in public, and that was very dangerous. It'd be crazy to say something like that there. At other tables, men stared at him in disbelief, trying to convince themselves he was just another drunk. Jack realized the guy truly wasn't afraid. After all, it was impossible to count how many people had lost their heads for insulting royalty. He snapped out of his trance when his name was mentioned at the table. They were referring to him as the third young master of the Marquess's house. One of the group's friends said there were rumors that Jack had used forbidden magic, something the other two friends didn't seem to believe since they thought he was a complete idiot, and the MC glared at them. They had no idea who they were talking about. The blonde even asked how that loser had learned forbidden magic since the mage who taught it had died long ago. While the woman laughed, asking if the boy wasn't the fool of the Marquess family, he must have tripped over something somewhere. The girl who had offered the food returned, asking what was so funny about that whole conversation. Her question confused Jack until he realized he was smiling while listening to it. She sat down next to the boy, cheerfully asking if he wasn't going to tell her since she was really bored. However, he declined, stating it was nothing much, just that the third young master of the Marquess house was an idiot, according to what he heard. And he confessed he had been eavesdropping on the conversation, and the woman said people were like that. They judged everything based on rumors. Then he asked what she was like when it came to judging others. Smiling, the woman explained that she judged things after seeing them for herself, because rumors were just rumors. The boy countered, saying that rumors could be true sometimes, something she agreed with. But she didn't elaborate much as Jack grabbed a piece of pie and bit into it eagerly. It wasn't as good as the one his butler used to make, but it still tasted amazing. The woman decided to end the subject by saying it was just what she thought. But if the third young master of the Marquess house was as attractive compared to the rumors, she didn't think they were true. That left Jack surprised. She asked what was wrong as he analyzed the woman, who had a scar on her cheek, a body covered in muscles, and mercenaries as regular clients. So the boy asked if she was a branch manager of the Adventurers Guild around there, catching her off guard, but she soon smiled, embarrassed. Of course, he wasn't just making a random guess. There were mercenaries in every city, wandering around looking for work. They were hired to be soldiers in territorial battles, help people search for things, and even act as monster hunters. These jobs were distributed by local guilds, which were usually located near inns. That made Jack suggest the woman had a lot of free time. There was no other way she could be a branch manager and also manage an inn at the same time. And the blonde explained that even though there wasn't much to do lately, she needed a way to make money in such a quiet territory like Arbeloa. It seemed that the inn was actually a lodging owned by the Adventurers Guild. The protagonist commented that the woman was doing something pretty bold, and even though he was known as the idiot of the Marquess house, he wasn't famous, not even close. However, the woman had recognized him in such a remote place. How would a guild branch manager be capable of that? Until they realized the real reason for the recognition. Upon seeing the village, the boy had spoken to his horse, saying he knew they would find some kind of society nearby. However, before entering, he was stopped by two guards who asked why he was coming to the city and if there was anyone else with him. Jack simply showed his family's crest as a good enough reason to do whatever he wanted. Upon recognizing the crest of the Marquess family, one of the guards apologized for not recognizing the boy at first, and both bowed, asking him to enjoy his stay and allowed him to enter. Back at the bar, he suggested that the girl had heard everything from the guards, warning that contacting a private soldier without the Lord's permission was very dangerous. That made her laugh, suggesting the little one was worried about her life. He gave a crooked smile, saying yes, for now, at least the woman was being nice to him. Even if she had only heard rumors about him, unlike his brother and the knights who tried to annihilate. She thanked him and extended her hand to greet him, introducing herself as Jane Arbeloa. As they shook hands, her last name made the boy very curious. That was the name of the territory they were in. Understanding the situation, Jane explained that she was the third daughter, and her older brother was the lord of the region. She was a noble working as a mercenary. Although that was something only commoners usually did, she was an incredible woman. The boy asked if nobles didn't usually send women to marry at her age, but the girl had loved that job. Besides, no one in her family wanted to sell her. It was very different from Jack's family, so much so that it made him envious, but all he said was that it was a great household. Jane called the little dog, and the two began to play a bit while she continued the conversation, asking what the young master of the Marquis house was doing alone in a place like that with no escort. To which the boy replied that an idiot didn't need any escort. His answer left Jane stunned. Turns out he was quite funny, which was unexpected, but she already suspected he would be different from the rumors. Jack said that even so, he had a long road ahead of him and would indeed like to hire some escorts. At most 5 people with experience camping and good cooking skills, if possible. The reward would be 2 gold coins in advance and 3 upon arrival. Jane's eyes sparkled, seeing how generous the boy was. It was true, after all, merchant escort missions cost 30 coins per person. The kingdom's monetary units were quite simple. It took 100 coins to make 1 gold, so they were of lower value. The woman committed to preparing everything by the next day and asked if he would pay for food and lodging separately. He pulled 3 gold coins from his bag and handed them to her, asking her to prepare everything and, if possible, also arrange a carriage with horses. He was indeed a very generous client. Kindly, she told him not to worry and to rest, and she guaranteed she'd gather only veterans, handing him the key. Since such a fun woman was a branch manager, nothing bad should happen in that city. Upon entering his room, Jack collapsed directly onto the bed as he was exhausted. He even thought about taking a bath but fell asleep before he could. Suddenly, the boy woke up in chains in what seemed to be a cave while someone called him a pitiful child. He cried while this person asked if he would keep living so powerless forever. Tears fell endlessly from his eyes. Although being kind wasn't a sin, the woman considered being incompetent a grave one. So she asked if he wanted to change. With a trembling voice, the boy said yes. That's why the green-haired woman took his hand, congratulating him and wrapping him in a hug, saying that from that day forward, she would be his master. However, Jack woke up sweating in his bed. It was just a nightmare. Memories of his time with his master. The sun was shining outside, indicating it was already morning. He didn't even have time to process the dream because Jane burst through the door wishing him good morning and shouted, asking if she didn't know how to knock. With her was Arnold, who jumped excitedly on top of the boy, licking him all over. As he went down the stairs with his suitcase, the boy yawned sleepily, while Jane said he must have had a great night's sleep. That's why she had prepared high-quality transportation for him. And she introduced the men who would accompany him, making sure all were veterans. Ironically, among them were the guys who had been talking nonsense about him, now clearly embarrassed. The captain of the Fire Ant mercenary group introduced himself to Jack as John Doe. His nickname confused the boy. Smiling kindly, John Doe explained that it was a name given to unidentified corpses around there. He was blatantly using a fake name, but the protagonist ignored it and said it was a funny name as he shook his hand. The man said it would be a long journey from there to the Rocky Mountain, and they would have to camp about twice along the way. His 2 friends had once been chefs and had camped so many times they could be considered veterans, but all that mattered to Jack was leisure. So the young master handed him his suitcase and hurried them, since he was already tired. Thus, the escort moved out of the place, but before leaving, the MC commented to the girl that she had introduced him to a very entertaining mercenary, and Jane reaffirmed that he was indeed a veteran. That would be the case if he were a normal mercenary. Ron was from the 9th Circle, and he hid his identity and power for his own reasons. But Joe Nobody, the 8th Circle mercenary in front of him, was hiding only his power for no real reason. Smiling, the woman asks if he hadn't said he wanted a veteran, and ignoring the question, the little one says he thought the 2 of them would meet again soon, and she assures him they'll have a beer together next time. He winks at Jane, saying he'd consider it if she paid for the last round, and finally leaves the establishment. From inside, she wishes him a good trip, as she already had a certain fondness for the little master. During the journey, the boy rested in his cart. It wasn't luxurious, but it was good enough. Besides, it was a beautiful day outside, and he felt much better than the day before. While playing with his Mana, the MC notices that Joe Nobody was staring at him, wondering if there was a reason for that. He stands up, catching the blonde man's attention, and takes the opportunity to ask if he had any idea who the little guy was. Stammering, the man says he only heard that he was the son of a high-ranking noble. Jack pretends not to understand, asking him to continue, and the blonde man says that the branch manager believed the boy was traveling the world. The protagonist reveals he was very curious about Jane, so the guy tells him to feel free to ask anything. So Jack takes a pocket watch with his family crest from his coat and hands it to the man. Looking closely, he asks if that was the crest of a noble house. However, by the look on his face, Jack concludes that the guy knew what it was about, but not exactly. So he explains that around there was the house of a big idiot marquis named Valentier that would soon fall, and that was a crest representing the house. His words leave the men in complete silence. Jack says that thinking about it, he believed there was someone people used to call an idiot in that house. And smiling, he asks if the blonde man also knew something about an idiot who even got arrested some time ago. His discretion makes a man tremble to the core. Finally, it seems someone had figured out who he was, which didn't surprise him, since the boy explained it all so well to them. After he got out of prison, a rumor about using forbidden magic or something like that spread, he explains. Seeing the tension on the blonde man's face, he asks if there was a problem, telling him to laugh like the day before. But all the guy says is, "I'm sorry." Only, he wasn't completely wrong. After all, the MC really did know a bit about forbidden magic. His master was at the peak of that kind of enchantment. Even as a swordsman, it was impossible not to know about forbidden sorcery. However, Jack argues that there was no reason to use something like that when his fists were in perfect shape. When he refers to Joe Nobody, the man jumps nervously at being called. And the protagonist questions why he didn't say anything when his friend was spouting nonsense about him, since he did when it was about the king, pretending to be deeply hurt by the situation, leaving everyone there confused. Except for the group's leader, who makes up an excuse about being kind of poorly informed in general. The manager of that branch must have told him who Jack was and kept it a secret from the other mercenaries. Either way, he asked them to forget the past, since they'd be together for the next few days. Something Joe Nobody accepts, still anxious about the whole situation. That night, they sit around the fireplace commenting on how rumors were really just rumors. Jack is surprised by this talk, and the blonde man says it's because the boy didn't resemble other nobles who usually hated getting their hands dirty. Meanwhile, the boy was even doing the dishes, which made him quite different. The comment is surprising. The food was spectacular, and the MC had a belly full of the best things possible, in a terrible peace, except for the memory of Ron, who was surely suffering from his absence. Jack explains that this was the payment for a delicious dinner, and he was quite the gourmet. Thinking about it, the guy gets curious about how the guys handled the night watch, and the man explains that they drew lots. Jokingly, he asks if Jack would also like to participate, leaving him sulky, since a little boy like him needed sleep to grow. And he asks if the guy would take responsibility if he didn't grow. So, better to forget it. As they were bored, they decided to start sharing stories, and the MC asks what they should talk about first. When he chooses a topic, he asks how many dragons existed in that world. He doubted the group had ever stopped to think about something like that. The guys recall a founding king, or whatever he was, who had exterminated dragons several centuries ago. It was the legend of the founding kingdom. Stripping away all the nonsense, it could be summed up just like that. Julius Tesla exterminated all the dragons, conquered the western continent, and built his empire in the former state of the current kingdom. However, over time, the empire became a kingdom, having been reduced to a subordinate nation of the Tulkun Empire. Up to that point, it was the story everyone knew. Jack elaborates, stating that there were 2 dragon lords in the Black Sea, a baby dragon in the Imperial House, and 5 in the forest of magical beasts. There are 8 wandering around, at least that I know of. Polymorphous, so just on that continent, there were at least 16 dragons, he explains. They obviously wouldn't believe that whole story. Besides dragons only appearing in legends, no one had ever seen one until now. Thinking about it, the boy laughs, asking if that story wasn't actually funny. And he explains that dragons couldn't mix with human beings after all. A pact that could put their very existence at risk prevented them. Joe Nobody asks if that meant the founding king hadn't actually wiped out all the dragons, which was exactly the case. He hadn't exterminated any dragons, he just wanted an opportunity to negotiate with them. To be precise, the ones who did everything were just 2 nameless supporters, but that wasn't something he intended to share with the escort. Then the man asks what the 2 dragons were doing now, and Jack explains that the continent they knew was not actually the whole world. It was just the western part. On the other side of the sea, things were different. Except for the baby dragon, he says the dragon lords had a single mission, to guard the barrier in the Black Sea. Joe Nobody asks about the barrier, but the little one didn't know the details about it either, except that it was something ancient that separated the continents, and the Dragon Lords had basically inherited the mission to protect it. To be honest, he was also curious about what kind of world the East was. After all that chatter, there was no way around it, and the friends burst into laughter at so much nonsense. The blonde man approaches Jack, saying he was a great storyteller, and must have asked for companions just to have someone to talk to on his journey. The boy smiles, even knowing that no one took him seriously. He already expected that they wouldn't believe him anyway. The young man stands up, stating that it didn't matter whether they believed him or not. Seeing that the boy was heading to the carriage, the mercenary asks if he's already going to sleep. The boy confirms, saying he wanted to take a bath and change clothes first. He even tries to offer an escort for that, but Jack refuses, saying he could bathe on his own. Upon entering the water, the protagonist sighs in relief. Those noisy mercenaries didn't believe his story, which might seem strange since he mentioned real facts and still told everything. A protagonist hiding his power was boring, that's why he talked too much. Jack continues enjoying the relaxing hot springs, but thinking about Joe Nobody, he reflects that he doubted the man was a spy sent by Tulkun. He was a little strange, and the branch manager was also somewhat suspicious. If you thought about it, the situation seemed like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. He asked Jane to introduce mercenaries who could escort him, but an 8th Circle mana user hiding his name wasn't exactly what he expected. Someone as powerful as an 8th Circle. The captain of the Iron Blood Knights was also 8th Circle. In other words, someone who would be welcomed with open arms wherever he went had shown up as the captain of just any mercenary group. Could there be some hidden circumstance? Instead of bothering with that, he needed to do something first and begins his mana circulation in the water. He had recovered a lot from the after effects of the soul speech during his stay at the inn and in the carriage. He shouldn't have any problems with this. Even so, now all that mattered was his destination, which would lead him toward his master. As long as there was suspicion that Joe Nobody might be a spy, he preferred not to take him along. So he had no choice but to ask him directly. Returning to the fire, the men are surprised by how quickly he bathed. The boy now held his sword, explaining that he was more bothered than he thought and couldn't continue the bath. The guys ask what was bothering him. The question sounds like an insult to the boy, who asks if they were really that lost in the situation. Pointing the sword at one of the members, he states that the man had bothered him, and he asked Joe Nobody why an 8th Circle mana user was doing mercenary work. Jack reveals that the place he was heading to is very important, of great significance, and he didn't want to take someone like him who was clearly hiding something. The blonde man steps in to defend his friend, asking, "What do you mean? My boss is 8th Circle," but Joe Nobody quickly interrupts him. And assuming he really was 8th Circle, he asks what the boy would do in that case. Jack says that since he had told an interesting story, it was his turn to tell one. He wanted to hear a very interesting story about the guy in front of him. Joe Nobody asks what would happen if he refused. Then the boy brings his sword closer, saying that if he couldn't satisfy him, he'd become feed. Or could it be that you're a spy from the Tulkun Empire? He asks, making one of the men tremble. He throws out a feeler, saying that Jane had told him they'd have a beer together next time. But if he was a spy, why should he trust the woman? The expression on the mercenary leader's face changes completely. He questions why the boy was suddenly talking about Jane. The MC asks if, even after everything he had said, the guy didn't know. And wasn't he curious to know whether the woman's last meal would be a beer or not? Smiling innocently, he asks what Joe Nobody thinks, commenting that the situation was getting quite entertaining. The tension in the air was noticeable. Jack had pushed the guy to this point, and yet his mana circle didn't move. He was either being cautious or hesitating. What a lucky man. The boy says he couldn't control his strength well, so he wouldn't be able to hold back. He was planning to cut him down the moment he moved his circle. The choice was easy: die or live. So he gave him a minute and hoped the man made the right decision. Yesterday at Jane's inn, the woman had been talking to Joe about how Jack was a fascinating child, different from the rumors. Through that little boy's eyes, she could tell he was hiding a lot. She was the one who requested an escort mission for Joe Nobody. After all, you never know. A boy like that could change their lives. Who would look into those eyes and call him a retard abandoned because of her? Anyway, in the present, there was nothing more to say. Joe Nobody was getting a very bad feeling from that boy, like a herbivore standing in front of a lion. His intuition screamed that he was dangerous. It was strange now that he stopped to think about it. How in the first place had the boy discovered that he was 8th Circle? Could Jane have given him some hint? No, Joe Nobody dismisses that illusion. There was no way she had done that. He trusted her, and she would have told him if she had said anything. In front of him, the boy continued the countdown, 40 seconds. When the man finally speaks up, he suggests that if he really were 8th Circle, the boy wouldn't be able to hit him. The man stares at the boy, wondering how a child could have such a fierce gaze, but he doesn't back down. The one before him didn't even seem like a child. Meanwhile, his friend was dying of nervousness, begging him to just tell the truth. Joe Nobody didn't know where to start. He was in a situation where he felt like he could be devoured at any moment. The countless choices he had made in his years as a mercenary flashed before his eyes. But as someone who had always been on the lucky side, he decides to trust his instincts. Time had already run out, and since he wasn't satisfied, the guy was going to be taken out. However, before the boy could advance, the man says something. Actually, he asked about Jane's situation. He wanted to know if the MC knew everything. Joe Nobody's story was quite short. A love between the daughter of a noble and a random commoner. A common tale heard anywhere. He met Jane when she was 19 and he was 7th Circle. They fell in love at first sight, and the seeds of love had continued to grow ever since. It wasn't very surprising. Apparently, there was a very personal reason why they hadn't married yet. But even being a commoner and a noble, someone of 8th Circle would be highly influential. Someone like that doing mercenary work was still strange. Jack even considered that the leader might have caused some sort of problem. Well, considering that woman's personality, her house might not have been interested in profit. Trying to make sense of it all, the protagonist asks if Jane was really just the branch manager of the Adventurers Guild in a small territory and he's just a mercenary. Taking the opportunity to ask if he only approached him to see if he could gain some benefit, something the man confirms. But the protagonist doesn't know whether to trust him. A story like that could easily be made up. Staring intensely at Joe Nobody, the boy asks what he thought the Empire was doing with the baby dragon. The man replies with another question. How could I know about a fairy tale? His answer makes our boy smile. And he explains that Master is a title used for those who have carved 10 circles into their hearts. But even they don't know that beyond that, there is an even deeper realm, with monsters that use the power of souls instead of mana. The so-called transcendence. The information shocks everyone in the escort, except their leader. Then the boy continues. In 2 years, Hankes Beckerman, the Knight of the Tulkun Imperial Guard, will be proclaimed the strongest swordsman on the continent. And he explains that he will end up continuing the story of those transcendents who existed only in forgotten history. But, interestingly, that unfortunate man did not become a transcendent through his own strength. It was quite an interesting story, and the man asks the boy to go on. Jack says that the swordsman replaced his blood and half of his bones with those of a dragon. Because of that, he became a being that was neither human nor dragon. The look on Joe Nobody's face said it all. Everyone there was shocked. The idea of someone becoming a hybrid was completely absurd. But the man questions, what does that story have to do with the current situation? And the boy explains that there is only one dragon in the Tulkun Imperial House now. Even though they are nearly immortal beings, few experiments can be done with only one. That's why they sent several capable people to other countries. The first objective was to gather information. The second was to confirm the existence of other dragons. That last part makes the escort leader burst out laughing and say it was pretty amazing for a piece of fiction. Without looking at the other mercenaries, the boy is sure they wouldn't believe the man telling this story. Judging by his reaction, Joe Nobody didn't seem to be a spy after all. Crossing his arms, he asks, so, now that your suspicion has decreased? The boy confirms, wishing him a beautiful life with the loyal guild manager, reminding him to invite him to the wedding. However, something catches the boy's attention and he quickly positions his sword behind him. Joe Nobody, with the tip of a blade at his neck, had been caught trying to draw his sword first. Jack makes it very clear that he's only letting him live because he was the one who doubted the man in the first place. He pulls the guy close and whispers, so only he can hear, "This is the last time. If you let the juice thirst rise again, I'll turn everyone here, including you, to dust." That makes the rest of the group tremble, and they ask both of them to lower their swords and talk. The boy had done his best to get closer to the group, but it was no use anymore. The relationship between boss and employee was always complicated. After all that mess, Jack retreats to the carriage to sleep, while the men talk about what happened. One of them asks why someone with the potential to be a noble's knight captain chose to be a mercenary. The blonde man remembers that when they met, the leader said he was only fourth circle, and the lie made him upset. But since they had fought together for years and the friend had saved his life before, he didn't want to be harsh with him. Having an eighth circle in the group was reassuring, as it would strengthen the mercenaries as the most powerful on the continent. That way the man could become a mercenary king, but Joe Nobody doubted that was possible. He thought about how his companions saw everything as a joke, since an eighth circle would never be a mercenary king. There were at least 4 known mercenary masters, but he decides to shrug it off instead of arguing with his old companion. A young man in the group asks if everything that was said was true, and the leader confirms, even if it was shocking. The blondie calms the group, saying that everyone has their circumstances, but he questions why the captain didn't react. Memories of the confrontation surface in the man's mind, making him sweat even after everything had passed. His hands still tremble, and the sensation of being between life and death remains vivid in him. He won't admit it, but he almost peed himself in fear. As Jane said, the boy was interesting but dangerous. The continent was already in chaos because of the war for the Tulkun Empire's throne, but this situation was different. Spies, dragons, and everything else gave him a bad feeling, like a warning to investigate more deeply. Days later, inside the carriage, Jack asks if they want to hear another interesting story. The mercenaries' expressions turn tense, afraid of what he might say next. The boy asks how much they know about the Lord of the Forest of Magical Beasts. They explain that they only know the monster is at the 9th circle, but Jack reveals that, in fact, it's at the 10th. This surprises them, but he says everyone will find out in due time. What he wanted to tell was about the past. His words make the man curious, and Jack goes back in time 23 years ago, when there were rumors about the Lord of the Forest and the Harpy Lord. The mercenaries admit they had never heard of that. And Jack explains that orcs and harpies have always fought throughout history. They waged war for any reason, and any mercenary who entered the forest would know that. These two races are considered the strongest in the forest, sometimes even its guardians, due to their power. Jack says the Harpy Queen and the Orc King had a relationship, even though it's hard to believe. At first, they were just peaceful neighbors, but when Blackman became the Orc Lord, everything changed. 5 years later, problems arose, and the men get curious about that, making the boy smile. Continuing, when the romance between Blackman and the Harpy Lord was discovered, there was revolt among their races. Jack explains that humans, harpies, and orcs are different only by race, but all desire power, and that caused betrayal. Part of the orcs and harpies expelled their leaders and betrayed each other, using the forbidden romance as an excuse. But the plan failed, and the traitors were destroyed. Joe Nobody asks why the relationship between the races remained bad to this day, and Jack replies that Blackman and Valea separated. They prioritized the prosperity of their races over love, which makes sense, but left behind a legacy of hatred. The leader of the mercenary group doesn't know if the story is true, but remembers that the harpies and orcs used to be less dangerous. A few decades ago, they suddenly became stronger and gained the title of dominant races. The MC continues, saying that the harpies learned battle techniques from the orcs, and the orcs learned the secret arts of spiritmancy, used only by the harpies. This exchange of knowledge was only possible because of Blackman and Valea separating the races. Now they represent the forest, and if Joe Nobody is captured by one of them, Jack suggests telling this story. That way, maybe they won't eliminate him immediately. And the man, looking at the boy's angelic face, agrees to try. Changing the subject, he offers Jack some dried meat, which he happily accepts. Jane had prepared it, and it was delicious. Far from there, in the Marquis' palace, the man receives the shocking news about the attack on the 3rd young master's escorts. All forces were destroyed in the mountains near Arbelo, and his informant reveals that expert investigators say it was advanced magic. This enrages the Lord as it happened while the Iron Blood Knights were away. He suspects the king or the duke lost him in a possible third threat, so he orders Gonzalez to investigate thoroughly, and he nods in confirmation. The old man hesitates and asks about Jack's whereabouts, since his body was not found, which suggests that the boy might have escaped. But if that were the case, he might know something that interests the Lord. So he gives Gonzalez full authority to get answers. Before the redhead leaves, the Lord comments that he used to think his son was useless, but maybe he was wrong. That makes the informant stare at him seriously before leaving, thoughtful about what really happened. The next day, the boy and the group are already at the entrance of Rocky Mountain when Jack hands a sack of coins to Joe Nobody. The man is amazed by so much money, nervous as he receives it, saying it was too much for him. Jack, however, explains that he only needed 10 gold coins and some healing potions. The rest was theirs. With a kind smile, the boy thanks them for not letting the journey be boring and apologizes for doubting Joe Nobody. But now it was time to part ways, so he wishes them well on the way back. The men, however, remain still, making Jack ask if they weren't going to leave soon. Joe Nobody acknowledges that he might be meddling, but asks for permission to speak anyway. With the boy's permission, he says that being a mercenary wasn't as bad as the MC imagined. He doesn't understand the point of that statement, and the man continues, trying to explain his reasoning. He says that even without knowing all the details, he's seen how young masters without support usually end up. The third young master of a noble family, completely alone, was a strange and dangerous situation. Jack asks if he's suggesting that he become a mercenary, and Joe Nobody grabs his shoulders firmly and repeats that mercenary work wasn't as bad as he thought. If he avoided dangerous missions, he could travel the world and live a comfortable life without great risks. Jack points to the other boys, knowing they had no idea what Joe Nobody understood all too well. That night they faced each other. If the boy had wanted to, he could have destroyed him easily, even without using his full strength. The older man knew this, and for that reason found it even more unfortunate that he wouldn't become a mercenary, since he knew his talent better than anyone. And he admits he had already forgotten what happened before. In a world where one day he picked up a sword to survive, he hid his strength even from his companions. Hating to admit it, he says it was all his fault, and Jack thanks him for the words, but states that he'll pretend he never heard that. Since Joe Nobody was different from the others, without giving many details, the MC talks about a future event, something big that would happen in the West in a few years. And he asks the man to hide when the time comes, confusing the mercenary. But the boy says he wouldn't understand now, though he would feel it when the time was right. It would be an overwhelming sensation, as if it were something too big to handle, and he would need to run. Handing over the sack of coins, Jack advises, "Don't risk your life for a bit of gold, because nothing is worth more than living." The man fully agrees. Leaving our boy satisfied to be understood, he gives a friendly pat on his shoulder. Before leaving, the boy once again asks them to take care on the way back and prepares to enter the forest alone. Joe Nobody asks if he can know his real name, and Jack smiles, knowing he already suspected. The protagonist introduces himself as Jack and asks to be remembered only like that, without titles or surnames. Taking the moment, the boy asks for Joe Nobody's real name, who hesitates before answering. He reveals his name as Dynastismo. The protagonist then says that if fate allows, they will meet again in the future. Finally, Jack continues his journey, crossing a long bridge using mana to move faster. He feels he is close to the destination, passing by giant stones that he can only endure thanks to his young body. His movements, however, are no longer as agile as before, and he has to stop to catch his breath. Upon reaching a cave, he lights the way with a small mana sphere, confirming he's in the right place. All that's left is to cross a great stone wall to find his master, just as he did in the past. Finding that place before was a coincidence, the result of his escape from home and the suffocating exhaustion of that miserable life. Jack opens a flask and pours the liquid on the wall while wrapping his hands around his sword. He knew there was only one final step left, to run his hand along the blade, a necessary sacrifice. The boy stares at the sword, aware that this small act was more important than it seemed. Before returning to age 17, Jack had only been running and hiding just as he always did in his past life. For him, who had even lost Ron at that time, running seemed like the only possible choice. His trembling hands could barely complete the small necessary sacrifice, and he cried like a child. For someone like him, opening the stone cave had been nothing short of a miracle. Now he found himself in the same position as before, but this time things would be different. As he crossed the doors, the boy showed confidence in his steps, knowing the place well. He descended a staircase lit by a small lamp, though he felt a growing nervousness. It was understandable, since more than a decade had passed since his last visit to the place. At the bottom of the stairs, he fell to his knees upon seeing the sight that awaited him. There was his master, chained as before, with wide eyes upon hearing the boy's call. Jack wondered whether forms of life could truly become immortal someday. Not just the powerful, but anyone who wished to live forever. Monsters and emperors all would eventually die. This was an unchanging universal law. The same truth seemed to apply to the person before him, despite her unique abilities. His master from the past had lived at least 400 years using a body-soul separation technique. However, there was a magic that kept a connection between them. But even that extraordinary magic was now reaching its natural limit. He had met her when he was 10 years old, but the current situation was different. This time, he would have no more than 13 years to spend with his dear master. The woman in the form of a chain doll asks if the boy truly called her master, leaving him emotional. He had longed to hear that voice for so long, feeling a wave of overwhelming nostalgia. She shows curiosity about the boy's identity, asking if she should try to guess. The doll asks if this was some kind of joke to the boy. She wanted to know who the boy was, and he would not get a third chance to introduce himself. Laughing, he comments that her temper seems to have gotten much worse over the years, and says he missed her a lot all this time, provoking even more confusion in the woman. She finds it interesting to have a disciple she doesn't even know, asking if he knows who she is. The boy nods affirmatively. After all, how could he forget someone so important? The time they spent together was extremely valuable to him, more than just a dream. Even if it was something only he remembered, those memories were real in his heart. Then he introduces himself as the hero who ended the age of glory and began the age of humans, informing Valentine Milos, the great sorceress, that he was her disciple from the future, causing total bewilderment in the woman. What do you mean from the future? She hated storytellers and their inventions, asking if he already knew the reason. The boy knew it perfectly, stating that it was because stories always distort the truth with subjectivity. Annoyed, she says she should call him boy with the potential to be a storyteller, and asks what someone like her would say in such an absurd situation, challenging his claims. The atmosphere grows tense, but the only thing that comes to the boy's mind is a simple yet lost. That was probably exactly what she would say, recognizing his talent for imitating her. She jokes that the boy has a talent for storytelling and could make a career out of it, which offends him a bit as he calls her master. The woman quickly corrects him. She is no one's master. Her response only confirms she never changed. She was the same person as before. Realizing that words aren't enough, the boy gets up, determined to act differently. In a swift motion, he points his sword directly at the chained woman. He apologizes for his insolence, but he knew it was necessary. With the sword pointed at her, the woman realizes that Jack can use soul aura. He says he may be being disrespectful, but he will humbly accept any punishment after doing what must be done. This makes her nervous, and she warns him that if he breaks her chains, the entire place will collapse. Jack knew that, indeed, that was exactly why he intended to break them without hesitation. He advances toward the woman, the one who had taught Julius Teslin, the so-called hero. Julius had made a promise to his master that he would return for her, but he never fulfilled it. It took 50 years for the woman to finally understand that she had been abandoned by that coward. Jack acts quickly, destroying all the dragon bone chains that held her. Valentine screams when she realizes she's about to fall to the ground, but is caught by the protagonist, who assures her that he's completely different from that scoundrel Julius. Because he doesn't just talk, he acts accordingly. She holds back her tears as she remembers the past, but the moment is interrupted by the collapse. The ceiling begins to cave in due to the shockwave, and Jack tells her to hold on tight. He knew that Earth could be manipulated, so he activates 4 techniques simultaneously: Mountain of Wind, Forest, Fire, and Mountain. While holding the woman in his arms, he unleashes a blast of mana capable of blowing up entire mountains. Faced with such power, his master asks again who he really is, impressed. Jack insists that he's just her disciple because that's all that matters, not his origin or age. She is surprised that someone so young can master soul energy so well, and the MC jokes that he's a disciple from the future, and informs her that they would spend the next 13 years traveling together. The woman brings her face closer to his, trying to discern whether he's lying or not. This time, she seems to soften a little and slowly asks if the boy really came from the future. Jack explains that it was more a regression in time than a proper journey. It seemed like he was telling the truth. When he realizes that she finally believes him, the boy collapses to the ground before he can celebrate. The master warns that forced relationships never work, but he has his answer ready, arguing that if he hadn't acted like that, they would never have any kind of connection or relationship. But she didn't consider something like that a relationship. Valentine acknowledges that he's pretty good at arguing for someone in so much pain, and he asks who she thinks he inherited all that stubbornness from. Taking the moment, he formally introduces himself as Jack, her future disciple, and states that he will submit to her guidance in this life as well. 5 days later, in the territory of Arsenal, Jack was questioning how his master had remained silent all this time. He wanted to know if she was still organizing her thoughts or if she had simply chosen not to speak. At first, she had said she thought he was a descendant of House Teslin, but that was impossible. No one his age should be able to use soul aura. She begins to talk about the nature of soul power, but stops in the middle of the sentence, as if waiting for him to finish it. Jack knew that if he answered wrong, he would be punished, just like in his previous life. He explains that it was a power only a few selected among the mana masters could use. The master confirms this, but highlights that the energy accumulated in his soul was abnormal. That makes him smile. Even though he wanted to talk about his past life, Valentine's silence got in the way. She observes that his hands carried more dark energy than hers, which surprises even Jack. Then she asks if he ever wondered why he received such a rare opportunity as time regression. He had spent 5 days trying to guess what she was thinking, but in truth, she only wanted to understand the regression. Memories from his past life surface, nights destroying entire villages without compassion. Jack admits he had thought about it, but honestly, had no idea why he was granted such grace. Seeing her serious expression, he asks her not to make that face. He explains further, the regression wasn't by his own will, so if someone granted it to him, there must have been a clear purpose. If that were the case, this person would show up one day. If not, he would simply continue with his life. The time he now spent with her was the most important thing, regardless of any mystery. The master comments that at least his words were beautiful, and then asks what his plans are. Jack replies that he wants to find a companion. He needed someone he could trust. The night he rescued Valentine, he had fallen seriously ill. He had to secretly drink 2 high-level potions and even then was on the brink of death for several days. His body needed someone to protect him, to be his arms and legs when necessary. But for now, he would simply go shopping with a girl. He also needed a new sword. But then both of them were bumped into by a girl shouting for passage, who ended up dropping the flowers from her basket. She apologized, explaining she was in a hurry. Jack replied that they also weren't paying attention and asked if she was okay. That's when he realized he had just said he wanted someone by his side, and here was a possible candidate. While the young lady was collecting the flowers on her own, he inquired whether she would be willing to become his wife. The unexpected proposal left her visibly taken aback. Jack proceeded to offer the entirety of the contents within his bag as compensation. However, she declined, stating that the amount was far too excessive. A single coin, she explained, would have been more than sufficient, as it corresponded precisely to the value of the flower basket she carried. Thus, Jack completed the payment, and she handed him all the flowers. Before departing, she made a hurried bow, leaving Jack standing still, silently observing. His master remarked that it had been a long time since she had last seen a nocturnal being. Jack agreed, repeating the statement automatically. However, upon reflecting on the information, he assumed a more serious demeanor and questioned the master. The young woman did not appear to possess any unusual traits. Valentine appeared confused. She had assumed he had approached the girl precisely because he knew her true nature. In reality, Jack had chosen her because he recognized in her the potential necessary to reach the 10th circle with proper training. Now on his shoulder, the woman couldn't believe he hadn't noticed something so obvious. Clearly, he still had a lot to learn. Jack laughed and asked her to teach him everything, but that depended on him. She said he was exactly as she remembered, even after the regression. The green-haired master still found the situation odd. That child felt strangely familiar. Old memories surfaced in her mind, a blonde girl dancing in a garden. Everything began to make sense, and to think that now she was reduced to living in that village. Meanwhile, Jack thought that after they finished shopping, he'd need to find someone important. The night creatures were a race comparable to dragons in power. While the shop assistant spoke, Jack recalled the conflict between those two races that happened 10 years ago. It began when the vampires tried to escape from the forest of magical beasts. Despite their defeat, many took advantage of the war to flee, which meant that the girl from earlier was likely the daughter of one of those fugitives. But Jack didn't care about her origin, whether she was a night creature or the child of one. The shop assistant kept praising his choice of sword, but her excessive details irritated him. He cut the conversation short, asking her to finalize the purchase. Calling his master, Jack announced that he had already chosen his first subordinate. She doubted whether he truly understood what he was doing by choosing a night creature. But the protagonist argued that children carry no sins of the past. The master insisted he was just making things up to rationalize his decision, which made him laugh. In the past, she had made a non-aggression pact with the kings of each race, including the dragons. According to the agreement, all races except humans should not interfere with the human world. Therefore, all other races moved to the magical forest. However, that happened 400 years ago, so most of the kings who signed the pact were already buried. Even free from the pact, the creatures couldn't escape because the dragons still watched over them. And since they lived about 2,000 years, they were oppressing everyone there to keep the promise. Motivated by their own imprisonment, the master made the right decision, but Jack thinks they should have exterminated the dragons, just like he did in his past life, finishing them off one by one after discovering what was going on. Observing the vampire girl, he sees a merchant casually pat her head and calls Valentine's attention. She notices the scars on her fingers, but Jack reassures her, saying she doesn't need to blame herself. He knew enough about the situation even if he didn't know all the details, and reaffirms that, regardless of what he told others, he was her disciple. She tells the boy to do what he thinks is best, but warns him not to give his juice to the blonde under any circumstances, leaving him confused. After all, the girl is just a child who deserves good food, not restrictions. Later, the girl still blushes, remembering how Jack spoke kindly to her. She carries a cup of orc juice for her sick mother, following family rules. Her mother always warned her never to drink human juice, more specifically, the one provided by her uncle. In fact, she wondered if he would visit them that day, announcing her arrival at home. As she hears nothing, She continues walking toward her mother's room, asking if she was asleep. The woman recognizes the little girl with a weak voice and warns that they had a visitor, but she sees no one until she notices Jack there. Nervous, she spills a little of the juice. Meanwhile, Valentine orders the woman lying down to show her face, and so she does, revealing her pale blue eyes. "It's been a long time," whispers the sorceress as the woman recognizes her in shock. She wanted to know what she was doing in such a rotten place and in such a deplorable state. After all, she was Vivienne de Royale, the noble vampire progenitor. Outside the apartment, the little blonde plays distractedly with birds while Jack watches her bored, but he stays alert to the women talking inside the house, hoping for the best. Vivienne asks who that woman by her side is, suggesting she could be a vampire hunter. Valentine is surprised to realize the vampire didn't recognize her immediately, so she introduces herself as Valentine Milos, a name that makes Vivienne shudder all over, and confirms that she was the one who confined the vampires in the forest of magical beasts, her mortal enemy. Her trembling voice reveals her fear, but she tries to stay firm before her old foe. However, a harsh cough interrupts her speech. Valentine explains she is under a curse and can now only live as a human one night per month. Without mincing words, she questions again why a vampire progenitor is in such a deplorable state. Noticing that Vivienne hasn't drunk her red juice in ages, she demands an explanation about her condition. The vampire asks back if Valentine is feeling sorry for her, which seems ironic, and says that, in the past, the mage was so great and powerful that she would never dare come near her. It's not like she held a grudge over what happened in the forest or anything like that, since, if it weren't for the woman, it might have been wiped out by the enraged humans. Therefore, she would answer the question. Vivienne explains that there were 5 tyrants and 2 lords controlling the vampires in the forest. They tried to escape during the war, as her daughter was far too young for that hell, and she painfully remembers the dragon who spared them, offering exile in the village because she was too pitiful. The word echoes in Valentine's mind. Vivienne explains that the condition was to live there drinking only pig and cow juice, and in return, the dragon would spare her daughter. It was something miserable for her royal bloodline, and the sorceress makes a point to comment on it. Meanwhile, outside, Charlotte asks when Jack will leave, impatient. She explains that her uncle is coming and he didn't like having visitors there. But the MC doesn't care and says it was very important for him to learn more about her uncle. The girl gets scared by the boy's sudden eagerness to meet her uncle. When she suggests that he approached her just to rob her rich relative, Jack is slightly offended. "It's boring to wait," he says, asking her to just talk about the mysterious uncle. And the blonde thinks about what she could say besides the fact that the man is loaded with money. Charlotte explains that he gave them the house and brings food every 3 days. She was probably referring to the animal juice when she mentioned food. Before Jack can explain the reasons for his curiosity, a voice echoes. The uncle had finally arrived. The gray-haired man asks about the new friend, suspicious of the boy's presence, and comments that he had never seen that boy before. Charlotte gets excited about the man's arrival, even though the tension was clear. Observing him, the MC celebrates the presence of the famous uncle, the little blonde, who attests that his appearance suggested the boy was from some noble house. Jack watches expressionless. There stood the dragon in disguise, just as he suspected. While the newcomer insists on questioning him, he realizes there was another guest inside the house. And in the room, Vivienne asks the doll to call for her Charlotte. Outside, the tension between Jack and the mysterious man was palpable until his master intervenes telepathically. He responds, informing her of the man's presence, and the woman asks him to bring the child and the man upstairs with him. The stranger questions why Jack was muttering there, to which the boy replies that he only obeys his master. Opening the door and calling everyone, Jack knows the man came to observe his toys in their final moments. Inside the room, the mother tries to speak to Charlotte, but her face shows despair upon seeing the visitor. The man asks why she looks like she's seeing a ghost, stating that he won't interfere in her final moment with her own daughter. Charlotte cries desperately at the bedside, asking if her mother was hurt, and begging her to drink the orc juice she brought, sure it would make her better. The woman gently refuses, saying it's okay, thanking her daughter for going out just to buy her birthday gift. The conversation confuses the girl, who insists on knowing what's going on, while everyone watches the scene. Originally, they had no reason to be there beyond coincidence, but now they were witnessing an imminent death. Jack directly asks if her name is Vivienne and if he can be trusted with Charlotte, as it was time to act and create a reason for his presence. The woman seems lost, so the boy decides to simplify things. Surprising everyone, he asks how she wants her daughter to grow up, as a vampire queen in her rebirth or as a progenitor ruler. And, if neither of those options, did she want the end of the dragons who treated vampires like toys? His proposal draws an ironic smile from the dragon present. Vivienne, with difficulty, asks Jack to come closer and explains she always knew her daughter's nature was different from the norm. And she answers that she only wants to see Charlotte happy, smiling, nothing else matters. She asks his name, and upon hearing Jack Valentir, she smiles weakly, entrusting her daughter to him. The MC promises he will take responsibility for the little blonde from now on, so she needn't worry about anything else. Calling Charlotte one last time, Vivienne declares her love before dissolving before her daughter's eyes. The The girl screams in despair, trying to hold on to her mother as she fades away, unable to accept what happened. Meanwhile, Jack and Valentine observe in silence, but the fake uncle starts laughing hysterically at the tragic scene, as if it were hilarious. And he comments on how absurd it was that a brat like that would take responsibility for a child who was also about to pass on. Vampires turning into dry twigs from malnutrition. He laughs as Jack, enraged, punches him with concentrated mana. The blow sends the man flying back, but he only comments on the boy's rudeness, calling him a bad influence for Charlotte. When he threatens to teach a lesson, Valentine intervenes, asking his real name, leaving him perplexed. It was peculiar, as there was no trace of magic there. Even so, the doll was speaking to him live. She ignores his reaction and mentions the other 5 dragons who should be in the forest, but clearly weren't. "You're only 200 years old. Are you an adult dragon born in that era?" she asks, making his eyes flare. "How does the doll know such secrets? Who the hell are you, freak?" He growls, with all of his rage rising to the surface. When Jack hears the insult to his master, hatred completely overtakes his thoughts. Valentine asks to be set on the ground, stating she can stand on her own. She formally introduces herself as Valentine Milos, the ancient mage, making the dragon change his expression. "No way! That immortal necromancer?" he asks, unable to believe the revelation. And the woman nods, as she had already received a nickname like that. The dragon grits his teeth, accusing her of lying shamelessly about her identity. Valentine then mentions Bahamut and Voldemort, secret names only dragons themselves and those who have seen them would know. This revelation finally makes the man accept the truth, surprised that she was still alive. Finally, he introduces himself as the proud fire dragon of the Machiavelli lineage, Galactus Machiavelli. He sneers at the poor place, confessing he just wanted to get rid of the child, the unwanted legacy of his toy. Valentine commands him to step back immediately, but the man mocks her, asking if she had forgotten the verbal pact, because they, superior dragons, had always shown mercy to the other races besides humans out of pity. So how did she dare command a dragon like him to step back? However, Valentine stands firm, saying the man got everything wrong, because the mercy in the story had always been her. A statement enrages the man. She explains the ancient pact and how dragons were never truly merciful. They separated the races because of their arrogance, believing themselves superior to all. She's surprised that even after the war that happened in the past, they hadn't improved their bad habits. The dragon laughs at the history lesson, calling her a ghost of the irrelevant past. Jack, furious, interrupts him, referring to him as a disgusting lizard and explaining he had planned to just listen because he was very polite. However, he questions how a 4-legged beast dares to act like a human while being so arrogant in front of his master. The insult makes the dragon promise to tear Jack to pieces, his claws appearing threateningly. Unafraid, Jack charges forward and lands a phenomenal kick, throwing the dragon against the wall. With his foot on the chin of the defeated one, Jack warns, "From now on, treat Valentine with respect." The dragon spits juice, cursing the boy and questioning how an inferior human dared to do that to a dragon of his stature. Tired of the argument, Jack orders him to stop with the nonsense and look down before he decides to end everything. The dragon, however, grabs his foot and throws him into the air, shouting that he can do whatever he wants just because he has Valentine Milos' support. Charlotte watches everything while crying as the MC comments how Ron would freak out if he saw him this dirty. "Your uncle is irreparable trash," he says, making the girl finally see the truth about him. The girl breaks into tears, realizing what had been happening all this time. Jack takes her hand, asking her to take a good look at Galactus, and reveals that monster was responsible for wiping out her people, her father, and treating her mother like a toy. Charlotte tries to defend him, but Jack insists that he only needs her consent to end the guy's bloodline now. All that mattered at that moment was the blonde's answer. "I'll show you the power of the one who will take care of you," says Jack, charging forward with his sword. However, the vampire is faster, skillfully dodging all of Jack's attacks. The two resume direct combat, but it seems our boy once again fails to hit his target. The mocking vampire comments that after so much talk, he expected more from a mana user, but clearly he was nothing special. Before he can finish the sentence, his hair falls to the ground, cut by a precise blow. Jack smiles with satisfaction, explaining that the hair was bothering him, and now they could fight seriously. The surprising attack makes Galactus call them the worst names possible, tired of the nonsense. He launches a wind-splitting power against Jack, who surprises everyone by defending himself. Even Valentine is shocked as the boy cancels the dragon's magic with his own abilities. The battle continues until the boy finally knocks the vampire down, stomping hard on his face. At that moment, he recalls the enemy's identity and confirms it was Galactus Machiavelli, son of Luca Machiavelli from the Forest of Magical Beasts. The revelation leaves the vampire pale upon realizing Jack knows his father. He was one of the 5 ruling dragons commanding the forest. Jack couldn't forget the dragon he had decapitated in his past life, though he had never encountered this figure before. Given his current state, he must have had a premature departure somewhere, or had been hiding around. The boy asks why the man acts exactly like his father, and he growls, demanding to know who that idiot was. Jack introduces himself as the first and last disciple of Valentine Milos, the woman he so despised. The defeated one questions how a human destroyed his soul's speech, a magic that was supposed to be invincible. The scene was pathetic. It didn't even look like he was seeing the strongest life form in the world in front of him. He gives the surrendered man 5 seconds to apologize to his master, pointing the blade at him. Even with his face on the ground, the proud Velactus asks what would happen if he refused to obey, and Jack coldly replies that he would reduce him to dust so thoroughly that no one would ever find the remains, just like he did with a certain someone. The tension is palpable as the countdown proceeds, everyone watching in absolute silence. At the last second, Velactus reveals his dragon wings and takes flight, deciding that retreat is better. For now, he should return to the forest and warn the others. Jack looks up, reluctant to use more mana, but knowing the situation had changed drastically. He then summons the post form of the Soul's Sword, creating a whirlwind of mana in the sky. That surprises the opponent, who was flying confidently. It was the first of the forms of power from the 4 realms, beginning with the sky. Velactus looks desperately to the sky, finally understanding what kind of monster he was facing. Inside the whirlwind, everything was black and white, and Velactus couldn't escape at all. Terrified, he saw the gigantic figure of Jack chasing him, screaming desperately for him to back off. Suddenly, the boy wakes up startled in an unfamiliar bed in a luxurious room he had never seen before. Confused, he looks around until Ron rushes in, surprised to find him awake. The servant fires off a series of questions about how many fingers he sees, if he remembers anything, how he feels. Jack, annoyed, asks him to stop the interrogation and explains that he's fine, but wants to understand what's going on. His first concern is to ask about the girl and the doll, who were with him before. The butler informs him that Charlotte is sleeping in the room next door. He comments that even not knowing exactly what happened, she seemed extremely tired. While Valentine is on the sofa, and the servant points to the green-haired woman to confirm if Jack was referring to that. Our boy smiles when he sees Valentine and greets her with a good morning, which she immediately corrects, stating it's already afternoon, leaving the butler shocked by her ability to speak, and he asks if the lady was angry. The woman responds dryly that he is free to do whatever he wants with his own body, and Jack laughs, teasing her by saying he knew she was worried about his condition. Ron, intrigued, asks how a doll could speak and remain motionless for 3 days, something the protagonist says he'll explain later, because what matters now is treating Valentine with the respect she deserves. Ron promises to follow the orders, still confused but trusting his master's judgment. When questioned about recent events, the butler tries to summarize the complex situation. The bodies of the escort were finally found in the mountains, and naturally, a Marquis found out about it. So the Valentier family sent knights to investigate, and believing that Jack might have a clue, they started tracking him. In addition, several people had seen him at Arbelow. They followed clues to the Asenbull region, where the epic battle with a dragon in the sky took place. That's when they found the MC unconscious. They didn't know exactly what happened, but he was already in critical condition, so they took him to the temple for treatment. Ron learned that the boy drank 3 high-level potions alone. It tasted like strawberry, the boy comments, laughing at the coincidence with his favorite flavor. Changing the subject, Jack questions what the servant was doing there instead of taking care of Elizabeth as he had promised. The butler is embarrassed to explain that Elizabeth wanted to come, but the Marquis stopped her. In her place, they sent Ron and an investigation squad with the Marquis' own support. The revelation surprises Jack. Apparently, his father was even dumber than he thought. The atmosphere grows tense when the red-haired informant of the Marquis enters the room without warning. "What do you want?" Jack asks immediately, while the spy is surprised to see him awake. Gonzalez introduces himself as the vice-captain of the Ironblood Knights in charge of the investigation. With disdain, he questions whether Jack understands that adopting a commoner as a companion is not appropriate for a Marquis. He criticizes the boy's abilities, saying he should at least maintain the dignity of his position. Before anyone can defend Jack, the boy asks for silence and lets the redhead speak. Then Gonzalez says he will ask a few questions. According to what the butler knew, he bought 3 high-level potions for the 3rd young master. Therefore, he would only withstand 3 uses. His stance surprises the informant, who remembered when the brat couldn't even look him in the eyes properly. The redhead reveals that Jack was the only survivor of the incident with the guard and demands explanations. The boy responds evasively that it wasn't anything important, just that his escort had received strange orders to break his bones. But he stops mid-explanation, noticing the man's fearful expression, which suggested he wasn't aware of everything. Gonzalez pressures him to continue the explanation. "It was pretty wild, right?" he comments casually, mentioning what the knight who led the attack had planned. The informant asks if he's referring to Rizon, and Jack confirms, remembering how they threatened to destroy his mana circle. With complete sincerity, the boy states that he simply finished them all, leaving the redhead in shock. But the boy repeats it, making it very clear that he had no regrets. Now clear that it was an internal act and not external, Gonzalez is stunned that the culprit is Jack himself. "It made no sense. I never let anyone who tries to screw me over leave alive," the boy says, asking if he looks like he's joking. The knight warns him to watch his words, calling him a clueless newborn pup. Ron tries to intervene, but is pushed aside and called a disgusting servant, putting Jack immediately on alert. Without hesitation, the MC punches the redhead, who falls to the ground. It was the third time he had taken it silently. However, he soon feels dizzy and collapses onto the bed, which worries the butler. The boy assures him that he's fine, and mentions that the man lying on the floor was just a seventh circle. He asks if Ron isn't tired of pretending to be a powerless servant, making the butler smile. Pulling on his shirt, the boy asks him not to live like that anymore, and confesses that he thought it would be easy for him to go on like that forever, but had reflected enough to know it wouldn't work, arguing that at the very least, the servant should be treated like a person. Ron's face clearly shows that he liked all that freedom. As the butler prepares to act, Jack asks how much time he'd need to cook the redhead, suggesting 5 minutes. But the guy laughs, joking that it was too much time for his cooking skills. Of course, they weren't talking about food. The situation was obvious to everyone present. Ron dominates Gonzalez by force, even while being called a damn servant repeatedly. The redhead tries to fight back, but is always defeated by the butler's ninth circle power. Outside, the guards wonder how a simple servant could cause so much violence. Jack watches the fight with indifference, trying to remember where he had seen those movements before. Even being ninth circle, Ron's fundamentals were magical, not martial, though his physique was average. Gonzalez, a seventh circle knight, should have won in hand-to-hand combat, but was easily overpowered. Even if he were a spy from the Tulkan Empire, Jack would never be able to win in a fight against the butler. Desperate, the informant grabs one of the guards' swords in an attempt to strike his opponent. But before he could attack, Ron knees the redhead in the nose, utterly humiliating him. Our boy watched with satisfaction. His servant had endured disrespect for years and was now breaking free. Looking at his fallen enemy, Ron turns when called by the protagonist. "Why is it taking so long to cook a single ingredient?" Jack teased, smiling. However, behind him, Gonzalez is getting up, ready to charge at him. But Ron is faster and lands the final blow on the redhead, sending him flying. "Needs more training," Jack mocks. Meanwhile, the guards are scolded for just standing and watching. Now alone, the boy grabs the redhead's head, saying it was time for a little chat. He offers a deal, arguing that a capable guy like him could go much further in life. Even humiliated, Gonzalez still tries to belittle Ron until he gets his hair pulled by the boy. "Understand your situation now?" he asks, still holding him. Then he states his offer. Gonzalez would remain as vice captain and have the chance to develop his mana. He was in his early 30s and would surely make a good vice captain knight, so it would be pointless to finish him off, and asks if he wouldn't like to reach the 8th circle. The knight looks visibly tempted. Jack assures him it would be a secret agreement between the two of them. Beside them, Ron was suspicious of the young master's intentions but proud of his growth. The scene is interrupted by Valentine, who taps the servant to get his attention. He apologizes for not noticing her before, trying to introduce himself formally. "You inherited the energy of the Sword family," the woman comments, leaving him completely disoriented. Valentine deduces that Ron reached the 9th circle 20 years ago, indicating a high rank in the past. "You could have reached the 10th circle," she says, suggesting he had the potential to become a master. Ron is confused, not understanding what she's saying about soul control. It had been exactly 19 years since he stopped using mana regularly, and only used mana recently to follow Jack because he had no other choice. The butler reflects that he feels no shame, even being disrespected. He chose to serve freely. Valentine asks how he could be satisfied serving that child for the rest of his life. She wondered where so much talent came from, but the answer was obvious. It was someone a member of the Sword family was risking his life to protect, so she asks if he already knows the truth about the child. But he only knows what Jack himself told him, maintaining respect for the past that hadn't been shared. Ron smiles, imagining Jack reacting with a "what the hell is Sword family?" if he heard that whole conversation. Returning to the redhead, the MC threatens to tear his mouth in a normal situation, but would let it go this time, and once again offers him the position of vice captain. Seeing the hesitation, he comments that he expects nothing from him, observing his desperate movements. "You're tired of getting beat up, right? Better stay quiet," Jack warns, sitting on the guy's chest. With surgical precision, he locates the 7 mana circles around the redhead's heart. He hoped the man wouldn't think too badly of him for what he was about to do. When Gonzalez moves, he gets pulled by the boy, who explains that if he wanted to finish the man off, he would have done it already. Mana surrounds the circles, rearranging them in excruciating pain. Upon opening his eyes, Gonzalez discovers he now has 8 circles. "It'll hurt for 3 to 5 months, the boy informs, leaving everyone shocked by his power. The informant was stunned by the boy's ability to forcefully create that. However, now he has only one choice: obey every order from the young master or face terrible consequences. And he mentions the rumors about him being able to manipulate forbidden magic with a frightening smile. Jack remembers when he punched Phelan and the rumor his father spread. Now Gonzalez was confirming it as an undeniable fact. The boy knew how to use forbidden magic. He orders the redhead to kneel and pay attention to what he's about to say, because he'll engrave it into his bones if necessary. Gonzalez must return to the Marquis household and lie that the third young master knows nothing. And within 3 months, 40 problematic members of the Marquis family must be eliminated in secret. The redhead agrees until he realizes the trap. Jack had planted something in his heart that meant much more than just a decoration. It was a sentence. "Don't be scared," says the MC, holding his shoulders. "If you obey me, you'll gain enormous benefits." The boy promises that the pain will be worth it, comparing the power of the eighth circle to an addictive drug. Laughing at the knight's paradoxical situation, he says he always knew the guy would want more. Besides that, he remembers how Gonzalez humiliated Ron during the journey. But now the roles were reversed, and Jack declares that the redhead will be the butler's new servant. And the guy just mutters in acceptance, head lowered. With the deal done, the protagonist kicks Gonzalez out of the room, satisfied to have a new subordinate. He hoped chick number 2 would be more obedient than the first. Turning to Ron, he asked if he finished his conversation with Valentine, receiving confirmation. Starving, Jack wants to eat, but is questioned about going out in those old clothes. The mage, always prepared, had already set aside a clean outfit, showing his usual care. Ready to leave, they are interrupted by Charlotte, who hugs the boy with a trembling voice full of concern. "I thought you'd never wake up," she says as he returns the hug, moved. He orders that their favorite dishes be prepared to share with the vampire girl. He's surprised by how strong the blonde is even without ever drinking real juice. Outside, the orange sky lights their walk as Jack apologizes for destroying her home. However, Charlotte explains that even if it were intact, without her mother, the apartment wouldn't be a home. Jack gently holds the girl, revealing that he also lost his mother when he was very young. Charlotte is surprised to hear that even so, he found happiness with his butler and master. He uses mana to make his juice flow, offering the hungry vampire an unprecedented taste. As soon as she drinks, Charlotte feels a wave of energy run through her body. The vampiric power had been activated. Vampires rival dragons precisely because of their ability to regenerate instantly with potent blood. Despite the confusion, Charlotte smiles brightly, feeling better than she ever imagined possible. Jack asks how she feels about the earlier events when he promised to show his power to prove himself worthy of the responsibility. And the little one reveals she was scared, but it was exciting, and she calls him Appa with innocent admiration. Jack corrects the nickname to Boss, making her laugh with joy as she adjusts to the new title. Inside the mansion, the revelation that Jack defeated an adult dragon leaves Ron shocked. He explains that dragons before the age of 50 are already masters, with 5th circle mana hearts. The Dragonoid transformation technique allows them to compact their massive form into human size, optimizing combat. And if a dragon's original form is specialized for using magic, its transformation is a technique that maximizes power in close quarters combat. If that idiot Velactus hadn't given him time to use soul speech, he'd have been in real trouble. Ron insists that Jack eat vegetables, reminding him he's still a growing child. But that doesn't matter, and the MC resumes the conversation, calling the dragon an inexperienced fool. After all, the human was merely 2nd circle and still caused all that damage. Jack notices how strange the conversation is. Normally, killing dragons would be unthinkable. The fire ant mercenaries would die of shock if they knew what he'd done. The butler turns red when he realizes the young master deduced his knowledge about dragons, because he thought he knew absolutely everything. However, the boy reminds him that he only shared that the man would have a premature passing, showing how he connected the dots. Ron reflects that there were many secrets his master did not know, and they would remain that way. He was never one to be interested in long stories, despite his cautious nature in past lives. Even when they fled together from the Marquess house, the butler kept his secrets tightly guarded. Everyone has the right to their mysteries, thinks Jack, but he needed to confirm a crucial suspicion. Looking into the butler's eyes, he directly asks about ties to the Tulkun Empire. The confusion on Ron's face is genuine, and he denies any connection to that nation. Jack's relief is palpable, as that concern had weighed on his shoulders for a long time. His calm smile conveys the desire not to burden his loyal companion. Despite the post-battle exhaustion, it was time to form a new mana circle. The use of soul energy always drains him, requiring sturdier circles to cushion the impact. Valentine interrupts the boy's thoughts, surprised that he used the Dark Bond, a forbidden magic only the two of them knew, for she had created it herself. In times of war, that technique bound promises to the very existence of the target. So if broken, it wouldn't just affect their circles, but their entire bodies. The mistress asks what Jack intended by engraving something to Gonzalez's heart, and he reveals that he engraved in the redhead a guarantee to protect Elizabeth and Ron. Ron becomes emotional, understanding how much his young master values his survival. The scene is interrupted by Charlotte, who enters the room with tears in her eyes, crying after being treated like a doll by the maids. Jack invites her to dinner, though she refuses, still not used to so much food. Then he asks the butler if it would be possible for Charlotte to attend the academy with the group. Ron hesitates, doubting his ability to arrange such a feat, for he was merely a servant. But the boy argues that he was a very competent servant. Since his praise had no effect, he says that apparently he would have to handle it alone. But he is scolded by the man as he shouldn't resort to blackmail, and he retorts saying he wasn't a criminal to do that. Charlotte's eyes shine upon hearing about the school, a dream that once felt distant, and he confirms that she would go for children should play with other children. The blonde's talent was too great to be ignored. Her age would be an obstacle, as the girl was only 11 and the academy accepted students from 14 years onward. But Gonzalez could help with that with a simple letter of recommendation, so he assures her there's nothing to worry about. A few days later, the group finally arrives at the academy and Ron bids farewell to the boy, handing over his luggage and asking him to take care. He even suggests the boy send a letter if he ever needs anything else, showing concern even in parting. Jack then asks a favor, wanting to leave all matters regarding the Marcos house entirely under his responsibility. He wanted to be sure the servant understood the boy wished to focus completely on his studies at the academy, free of outside distractions. Ron confirms the request, and Jack comments that Gonzalez wasn't as clever as expected, revealing contempt for the redhead. He considers the man merely a disposable pawn, someone to be used and discarded without remorse. The MC also mentions he had given the redhead a specific order, something he wanted the servant to help carry out. The mission involved cutting off hands and legs, but he clarifies he wasn't referring to someone's physical limbs. In truth, his targets were the officials of the Marcos house and the members of Count Mantis' family, a meticulous and cruel plan. With that, Miss Elizabeth's position would become even more complicated, for she was kind and pure. Jack didn't want her to become like the protagonist, but believed that the fall of that house could be the trigger for a change. He then asked Ron to take good care of her, showing a side that was both protective and calculating. The man seems proud to hear his master's words, commenting that he had changed quite a bit since recent events, something Jack agrees with. Upon entering the academy, the doll comments that he had a good monster inside him, but could be called a good person. The MC takes the opportunity to compliment the doll, saying she too is a good person, despite her stubbornness. The woman, however, rejects the comment, calling it empty and meaningless, maintaining her firm stance. When Charlotte sees the academy building, she comments that it was her first time in a place like that, showing admiration. Jack asks her to observe everything calmly, as she would be attending that place from now on, making her radiant. An academy staff member then approaches, asking if he was from Valenti, and the blonde's response is almost automatic. She runs to hug the boy, while he wonders if the woman wanted something specific with that approach. The staff member asks for permission, informing that the headmaster was waiting for him in his office, revealing a certain urgency. The man comments that the boy was well known there, mentioning his dark and striking past. The bloodied son of a noble family found amidst destroyed buildings was still a recurring topic. Even though some time had passed, the story still echoed, especially before the father of the current Duke Assemble. The former Duke, Rommel Einhard Assemble, still kept that place exactly as it was in his past life. A flashback invades the protagonist's mind, remembering that room and a conversation about an important test. He questioned if that was really all he had to do, complaining about the classes he would miss because of it. The old headmaster, however, assured him that as long as his name was on the official ranking, he would not be expelled. Jack's heavy eyes showed his disappointment, knowing that his older brother and father conspired against him. He was sure they would try to kill him before he reached adulthood, a cruel reality that the headmaster confirmed. The man had seen many children in the same situation, but could only offer a private room as help. Trembling, the boy wondered how he should live from then on, feeling the weight of loneliness and betrayal. The headmaster then pats his head, concluding that it was up to him alone to decide his own path from that point forward. Now in the current life, the boy is more confident and smiles, proposing a bet to the headmaster, something that surprises him. He explains that he was once in the man's debt, and that this was the time to settle it. All he asked in return was a small favor, something that could change the course of things once again. Hearing that, Rommel comments that the boy had changed a lot since he first found him, covered in wounds and barely able to speak. To the headmaster, it might have been only a month, but to Jack, it was 20 years, enough time for landscapes and people to transform. Interested in the proposal, the old man asks exactly how he would save his life, since, if he was right, the kingdom would fall within a month in the war against the Empire. The kingdom of Tesla may have fought bravely, but the Empire had 30 masters, many of them hybrids with dragon blood and bones implanted. In addition, Tulkin had over 1,000 Manning users above the 7th circle, while Teslan barely had 2 masters and fewer than 100 high-level warriors. With such a brutal difference, 1 month was more than enough. In fact, 3 days would suffice if the protagonist were a Tulkin commander. The only reason Teslan had resisted so long was Headmaster Rommel and his army of battle mages, around 700 soldiers trained by him. Without the accident, or rather the betrayal, of his most trusted advisor, the kingdom could have lasted another 2 months. Upon mentioning the traitor's name, the headmaster's eyes widen and he scolds Jack for addressing an instructor by name, but the boy remains unfazed. He calmly explains that Brutus Marcos was a Tulkin spy, current vice instructor of the swordsmanship department, 6th Circle Knight, and vassal Asimple. Rommel retorts, saying that was slander and that Jack would regret not listening, but the boy merely smiles. In a few years, when he stabs you in the back, you'll think, "I should have listened to that boy," the MC taunts, igniting the old man's patience. The headmaster, furious, advises him not to do anything he can't take responsibility for, preferring to pretend the conversation never happened. In the end, he releases the boy, pulling out a pocket watch with a crest and affirming he would not repeat his words. Seriously, he asks him to summon Brutus to his office, and so the boy does. Inside the room, the man faces them, starting with compliments on the protagonist's good work, but informing him there was no longer a need to send reports to the Empire. The man's expression is priceless. He freezes, asking what the teenager is talking about, but Jack just laughs. Out of patience, the boy says the man wasn't diff, just kind of dumb, asking him to make things easier and admit it already. Realizing he had been discovered, Brutus tries to defend himself, suggesting Jack suffered psychological trauma and warning of the consequences of the accusation. But the boy, short-tempered, already loses his patience, and before the spy can finish his speech, Jack throws the watch in his face and declares that he talks too much for a traitor. That takes the man by surprise, but the protagonist remains impassive, not fully understanding this situation unfolding before him. Bernardo asks his superior for explanations, but before he can get any answer, Jack lunges with a precise strike to the man's chest. The boy immediately regrets the attack, but it's already too late, and he charges again, questioning what the MC thought he was doing. Agile, the boy easily dodges the counterattack, leaving the instructor even more surprised by the unexpected skill of the child. At that moment, Jack is able to perceive the sixth circle mana protecting the man's body, but he knows that even the strongest have their weaknesses. Taking advantage of that, he delivers 2 brutal blows to the opponent's stomach, throwing him far with excessive force. All that violence leaves the old headmaster stunned, while our boy remains calm, determined to extract a confession from the spy. It's almost painful to see the man's state, now lying on the ground, his face marked by the beating he just took. Then the boy insists that he confess already, making it clear that there is only one chance to leave alive by cooperating. Brutus, however, remains firm in his act, pretending not to understand the accusations, which only makes Jack smile coldly. He touches the man's chest, testing his resistance before aiming at something even more vulnerable. He knew well-constructed mana circles were hard to break, but also that destroying something built with care has a much greater impact. Keeping his hand over the spy's chest, Jack announces that he will ask a few questions, and that if he doesn't get truthful answers, he'll break his circles one by one. The man's face contorts with tension, but he still tries to maintain composure, even under threat. The first question is direct. Would he confirm being a Tulkun spy? The mere mention of the topic makes the instructor tremble, but he denies it. His wrong answer prompts Jack to begin breaking the first mana circle, reducing the man to a user of only 5 circles. The next question is the same, as the boy is in no hurry and knows the truth will come sooner or later. The spy, now terrified, seems unable to even form a response, as if he were on trial. Jack explains with an almost cruel calmness that even if a circle regenerates with effort, the process will be so painful the man will wish for death. Moreover, he assures that if he wants, he can make it so the broken circles never regenerate, rendering the man's body incapable of rebuilding them. There's even a way to make a broken circle hurt forever, and the young master seems to be enjoying the idea. The boy's smile is cold as he observes the terror in the spy's eyes, knowing victory is already his. The dragon juice in his veins, combined with the boy's knowledge, might be able to repair something there, making the instructor tremble in fear. He asks how the boy knew all of that, and the mere fact that Jack was right about the experiments made the situation even more frightening. It seemed that human testing had already begun, and Brutus, stuttering, questions who had revealed such secret information. He calmly explains that he knew about the dragons and the experiments, provoking the man by asking why someone of the 6th circle would be involved in it. The instructor begins to shout, confused about how this person knew confidential research of the Tulkun Empire. His reaction is enough to draw an ironic smile from the boy, who then begins the process of breaking all the mana circles at once. He mocks the fallen man, and by the end of the process, Brutus is completely destroyed, with no strength to react. Without resolve, Jack turns to the headmaster, indicating it was time to hear his request, but the old man is still sulking, processing everything slowly. Brutus, even defeated, grumbles that the Empire would never forgive him, and that soon they would tear his body to pieces. Before he can continue, the boy slaps the instructor's face, silencing him for good. The headmaster, now out of excuses, admits he will have a hard time dealing with the mess caused, but can't deny the boy is mysterious. He definitely was not the same child Rommel had met a month ago. Indeed, he had changed a lot. Jack asks the old man to simply forget the matter, and the headmaster agrees not to ask for details, but still needs to know one thing. How did the boy uncover the scheme? He wanted to understand about the dragon blood, but is interrupted by Jack, who reminds him of their agreement. The headmaster should already know about the continent's situation. The signs of war were becoming obvious. The battle for the Mother Association was already starting to go public, with moderates led by the second son and radicals by the crown prince. In the end, the radicals won, and the empire, now dominated by extremists, joined them. Jack didn't know all the details of the incident since he lived isolated in the mountains for years with his master, but he had enough information. He states that he will leave Brutus alive, handing him over to the headmaster, since the fact that the man knew about dragons meant he had valuable information. That data would be useful to everyone, including the king, something that leaves Rommel confused, as he can't just call the boy an idiot when he talks about the crown. The headmaster can't help but ask, How did a sixth circle nobody lying on the floor know so much? Jack explains that in his past life, he discovered that the experiments with hybrids and dragons had already moved beyond animal testing. Human testing was about to begin, according to secret documents he had collected, so confidential that even within the Empire, few knew of them. But that, he says, is the headmaster's problem now. He only has two requests, since he felt offended by Rommel's harsh words. First, knowing the old man is rich, he wants a house near the academy with a garden. The headmaster tries to argue that all students must live in the dormitories, but Jack reminds him that he himself taught that every rule has exceptions. Tired, Rommel asks him to just say the second request, which is simpler, to accept Charlotte as a student, even though it's the second semester. The rules only allow new students at the beginning of the year, but once again, the protagonist brings up the matter of exceptions. The headmaster asks if the girl in question is the pale blonde waiting outside, and yes, it was Charlotte, who was now squishing Valentine as if she were a doll. Curious, Rommel asks what the relationship is between the two, and Jack replies that he's her new guardian, provoking a chuckle from the old man. Leaving the room, the boy is greeted by Charlotte, who celebrates his presence with visible joy. He asks if she waited long, but the girl ignores the question, anxious only to know if she'll be allowed to attend the academy. With a smile, Jack confirms that yes, and it sounds like music to the blonde's ears. For a moment, she seems happy, but her face soon lowers, as if something were bothering her. The hero notices and asks if something happened, to which she responds hesitantly that she never expected something like this to be possible. She always heard that the academy was a place exclusive to chosen humans, and she knew she wasn't human. Our boy, however, says that it doesn't matter and asks if she hates being who she is or if she'd rather be human. The question makes the girl's eyes even sadder, and she reflects on her situation with melancholy. It was strange to think about it, but she came from a pitiful lineage. House Royale, a royal family of vampires that tried to maintain its throne for generations. But in the end, her kind was wiped out, her father killed in the massacre, and her mother, the only person she had left, well, she already knew how that ended. Jack sighs and asks the girl to be proud of who she is, for she shouldn't diminish herself over something as trivial as being human or vampire. Charlotte de Royale is who she should be, and he encourages her to never forget her promises. Reaffirming his commitment, he says he will continue to be her guardian, and if one day she wants to become a monarch, he will help her. If she wishes to rebuild her species, he will face any hardship for it. Nothing would be impossible. But he doesn't want her to ever think badly of herself again, and the girl thanks him. She then recalls her mother's words, "Nothing in this world is free." The statement surprises the boy, and he agrees that, in fact, nothing is truly free. But he asks if she thinks he wouldn't do anything for his boss, to which Charlotte quickly denies, saying that's not what she meant. He then jokes, saying that in the distant future he might charge her for something, and the girl smiles, crushing Valentine in a hug. She promises to help him when the time comes, and seeing her so cheerful, he suggests a walk while the house isn't ready. A few minutes earlier, Rommel had assured them he would take care of Charlotte's enrollment either that day or the next. He also promised that her residence would be ready in 2 hours, but would send staff to take care of the mansion, since maintaining such a large place was difficult. Jack thanks him, knowing that the staff are actually an excuse to watch over him, something that doesn't bother him. During the walk with Valentine in hand, the master praises the boy, impressed by his words. For a child, he spoke surprisingly wisely about identity and acceptance, something she hadn't expected. She always thought he was just a weirdo, but now realizes she was wrong. She doesn't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but decides to take it as a compliment. As they walk, they spot a blonde boy training swordsmanship, a hardworking young man, but someone who didn't concern them. Valentine, however, pulls Jack's ear, insisting that they stop to watch. The three sit on a bench observing the training, and he notices that the swordsman must be no older than 17, despite being very tall. But what really surprises him is when he senses the boy's mana sensitivity, something that leaves him shocked. It couldn't be real. If a second circle commoner who would only ever reach the fourth, far from the imposing image his physical appearance suggested. Jack asks if Valentine was interested in the boy, and she retorts, questioning if he feared she'd take the teenager as a new disciple. That wasn't the case, since the boy would never surpass the fourth circle. He just wanted to understand what had caught her attention. The master had a sharp eye for talent like her, but she couldn't discern anything special about that boy. While thinking of something to say, nothing comes to mind, and the young man continues his solitary training, swinging his wooden sword through the air. Charlotte intervenes, commenting that the boy must have been training for a long time, as he looked about to faint from exhaustion. Noticing marks on his neck, she adds that he was visibly injured, but the master still didn't understand the interest. Upon closer observation, Jack realizes that the boy's magic circle had already been broken once and rebuilt on his own, something nearly impossible. Valentine admires the young man's determination and almost says more, but decides to keep it to herself. Jack, however, had already understood the reason for the interest. The foundation of a dark mage is death and destruction, hatred and vengeance. By reconstructing his broken circle on his own, he demonstrated a mysterious dedication. Every movement, every silent strike, done with hidden rage. The protagonist approaches and politely asks to interrupt, being received by the blonde, who asks if he can help him. But it's Jack who offers help. "You're using too much strength in your arm. Relax the right one and adjust your leg stance when attacking," he says. He also warns that if he keeps exposing his openings instead of protecting his heart, he won't last long in a real battle. The words make the young swordsman hesitate, clearly surprised by the knowledge of that strange boy. Our boy doesn't introduce himself, saying he's just a casual observer, but asks if, with all that size, he still gets beaten a lot. The question hits the boy's pride, and he looks visibly embarrassed, prompting Jack to hand him a high-level potion with a great flavor. When asked why, Jack just shrugs. "It's nothing much. I got rich after stealing bonsai." Before leaving, he finally asks the swordsman's name, who introduces himself as Thanos and reveals he is Jack Valentir, promising they'll meet again. As they walk away, Valentine asks why the apprentice was pretending to be kind, while Charlotte sincerely believes in his good intentions. It's then that Thanos realizes who that person was who helped him. He stares at the group with disdain. Now he knew the boy was a standout student with spectacular grades, while his own scores were 0 in every subject. And he considered that he might have heard the wrong name, because the Jack he had just met had nothing to do with the rumors about the trash son of the Marquis house. Near the academy, the protagonist was receiving a tour from a messenger boy of the Elder, who apparently called himself Joe Nobody. That was the same pseudonym used by a member of the mercenary group Earth Ants, or Fire Ant. He no longer remembered for sure. Our boy praised the mansion, impressed by its luxury, clearly a VIP lodging that exceeded his expectations. To an outsider, it looked like the headmaster had personally intervened in the battle for the House Volantier Association to provide such a residence. That made the protagonist wonder if that was why the messenger boy stared at them with a blank, emotionless expression. The boy defended himself, saying his emotions didn't matter. He was just following orders as a simple messenger. Jack then questions whether he knew that kind of behavior was rude, leaving the boy visibly uncomfortable and speechless. That's when the protagonist reveals that the supposed messenger was using polymorph magic to hide his true appearance. He wonders if the Elder already knew that, noticing how the revelation made the boy even more tense and restless. Ignoring the awkward situation, the MC is intrigued by the number of high-circle humans in such a small land. He takes the opportunity to analyze the man before him more closely, making sure he wasn't just another infiltrated spy. When the silence becomes unbearable, the supposed messenger bursts into loud laughter, completely dropping the facade. He asks how the protagonist discovered his true identity, since he had even stopped his mana flow as a precaution. He explains that he came in person because he was curious about the boy who caught the headmaster's attention. There he was revealing himself as Bellamy Cragg, the master of the magic tower of the kingdom of Teslin. In the war between Tulkin and Aslan in his past life, he had stood by the Elder's side, protecting him until the very end. Now, curious, he wanted to know how the boy saw through his perfect polymorph. Jack explains that under normal conditions he wouldn't have noticed, but he had already faced a beast using the same disguise. Speaking so informally to a tower master was disrespectful, prompting Bellamy to scold the boy. But the protagonist doesn't care and steps closer, saying that to earn respect, one must also give it. He argues that he never asked the master to hide his identity, so he saw no problem in treating him normally. With a wink, Bellamy agrees to let it slide this time, joking that it was the boy's fault for being so perceptive. The master then realizes the boy is truly special, and surprisingly, offers to teach him magic. The proposal leaves both Jack and Valentine astonished, seeming like an absurd suggestion coming from someone so important. The boy politely declines, explaining that he already has a master, which leads Bellamy to mention Bellamy himself. The master reveals he also wanted Jack's sister to be his disciple, but she refused. He insists again with the protagonist, saying that having two masters isn't a problem, but the boy maintains his refusal. Jack is impressed by the Tower Master's unconventional methods for recruiting disciples. Valentine then intervenes, calling Bellamy by name and revealing she knows his true identity. She explains who the master of the magic tower is to the others, making clear his status and power. The woman continues, saying that Bellamy met the requirements to reach the 10th circle, but seems to have given up. She asks if he was attacked when he tried to advance to the 10th circle in the past, which leaves the master shocked. She can feel subtle traces of the 10th circle within him, a phenomenon that only occurs with broken hearts. The doll encourages him not to give up, saying that even at his age, there is still hope for someone who has come so close. She explains that the magic tower is for those who persist, and he would need to prove he deserves to resume his journey. After so many profound words, Bellamy asks the name of the woman who hurt him, but she prefers not to reveal it. She suggests he consider it just a scar from the past, ending the subject with melancholy. In the conversation that follows, Jack asks them to remember that Charlotte is still waiting for them and they need to return. Before leaving, the boy informs the Elder that he will visit on the day of the opening ceremony. He was almost dragged to the magic tower, but Valentine expresses some pity for Bellamy's situation. She comments how one works to death without talent, while the other lives without even knowing his own potential. Her words leave the protagonist slightly offended, since she hasn't taught him anything lately. But the doll knows that Jack has already learned everything she could teach, His use of darkness against Gonzalez proved it. That was the final magic his master had shown him, completing his training. To think Bellamy came from the magic tower just to see the boy was truly surprising. Before crossing the mansion gates, Bellamy makes a point of looking at Jack one last time. He is questioned by one of the maids about what he was thinking, but honestly he didn't know, which leads her to suggest that he had heard something from the headmaster, which was true. Moments earlier, he had been in his office outraged that the old man accepted all the demands of a brat, even though he had nothing against Jack. It was just very suspicious that someone in the second circle had managed to subdue a sixth circle mage alone. To him, the boy was the most dangerous person there. Hearing his arguments, Rommel says he's only looking at one side of the coin. He reveals that the boy brought a girl with him. He was probably planning to spend his days at the academy near her, like anyone going through puberty. Besides, his presence there could be beneficial to the kingdom. The elder suggests they focus on figuring out how the protagonist knows so much, since he'd be staying for quite some time. Bellamy knew the headmaster was right, but still, something bothered him. He says he'll do whatever he's ordered to, but he had something to say. Honestly, he was worried that Rommel would end up getting involved in the political battle of the Marquis house. But the old man believed the struggle for the Valentier house succession was already over, leaving the master in silence. However, he says he knew the Marquis well. Even if his eldest daughter had the talent to become a master, he only saw her as a political tool, and his second son was just another among the thousands of third circle youths at the academy. Besides, he wasn't anything special. Bellamy had never seen anyone as dumb and unimaginative as Phelan in his entire life. The headmaster asks what he meant by all that, and the man comments that he really was going senile. Why would someone who gave up the position of duke because he was tired of political battles get involved in a mess like that? Some favors like asking for a single room or being excused from certain classes could be ignored, but giving Jack an entire house went far beyond that. He was worried people would find out soon, but his comment made the old man laugh. They had been together for 30 years, so he knew him well enough to understand the real reason behind all the talking. Rommel explains that even if it was just a hunch, he believed there would be many benefits in maintaining a good relationship with the boy, which the man found strange, but the headmaster kept smiling. Then he suggests that Bellamy personally visit the house once it was ready to see what kind of person Jack really was. Though reluctant, he decided it was better to accept the proposal. Now, after the whole conversation with the MC, he understood what his old friend had said. His thoughts make him smile involuntarily, prompting the maid to ask if it really happened. And he confirms, explaining that he just remembered something. Inside the mansion, the boy had already won over the maids as well as his chef and 5 bodyguards. With them gathered there, he asked that they monitor him as best as they could, assuring them he'd make it easier for them. First, the boy informs them that he loves meat, so they should prepare plenty for every meal, along with fresh vegetables. He knew it wouldn't be as good as Ron's food, but it would be decent enough. He spoke about food as if it were a very serious matter in scaring the guards. He had to make the most of his new staff. His chef even had his name in the Guinness book, though he looked like a Mongol. As for the guards, there were too many to remember all their names, so he affectionately nicknamed them the 5 Musketeers. The boy teases, asking whether the elder had trained bodyguards or spies, whichever they preferred to be called. Apparently, everyone there had already experienced a mana break at least once, so he informs them that they could learn from the boy who rebuilt his broken circle at the academy. Shocked, one of the men asks if the headmaster told him about them, but the boy denies it, asking him to stop questioning and get to work. In the middle of the lecture, Charlotte walks toward him to comment on how grand the place is. Now it was time for a tour of the mansion with his little brat. The elder handed over the mansion on August 9th, and classes wouldn't resume until the 16th. However, 5 days had already passed by the time he noticed. It had been a great vacation, of course. He bought clothes for Charlotte, ate delicious food while they strolled around, and even watched a musical together. It was a lot of fun, aside from 2 little things. First, he realized that although he hadn't lost his combat sense or mana control, his stamina was terrible. So, on one of the days he went out for a run, he was interrupted by the blonde calling out. She wanted to do everything her master did. Jokingly, the boy threatened to leave her behind if she couldn't keep up, which was totally unfair. When they stopped, she thanked him and asked if the boss would meet that same guy again, and he confirmed. Second, when the boy went to meet Thanos, he found him training alone as always. He was tireless. From what Jack had observed in recent days, he was a genius of effort. Completely talentless, but probably ranked first in the academy in terms of hard work. Let it be clear that Jack was very straight to be going there every day, getting involved in the life of that buff dude. But those wounds intrigued him, so he decided to ask why he seemed to have more injuries with each passing day, using the excuse that he wanted to know if the blonde had used the potion Jack gave him. He looked sad as he stared at the protagonist, who immediately asked what was with the funeral face. Thanos estimated it was worth 40 gold coins, which Jack confirmed, and all he said was that he would pay the boy back. This irritated the MC, who just wanted to know if he drank it or not. With all those injuries, some of the buff guy's bones were probably fractured by now. It must be harder for him to wield a sword with numb limbs, but he turned his back, saying that if that was all, he'd return to training. No normal person could train every day in pain like that, and Jack was sure he stayed there all day long. Jack comments that he didn't understand why a persistent guy like Thanos was walking around taking beatings, leaving him completely tense. Even Valentine thinks the protagonist had a talent for being annoying, and he asks if she didn't also think he was cute. But all she could do was feel pity, adding that if he really learned from her, he should know she saw all the hatred hidden in the blonde and all the desire he carried. Traits that, according to the Master, pushed him forward, but those same things were also breaking the teenager. This way, he would regress soon. All those comments made Jack certain that the doll had seen enough to decide what to do about the situation. Thanos certainly had no talent, but even so, he was called to be questioned about why he was swinging the sword. Then he revealed that he wanted to become the strongest swordsman on that continent, which surprised the duo. Before he could explain, Jack burst into laughter in the most disrespectful way possible. Sad about his reaction, the muscular man asked him to laugh all he wanted if he truly thought his dream was that funny. The boy explained that he wasn't laughing at him and asked him not to take it the wrong way. He hadn't been able to figure out what he wanted at all, but now he understood. And he called him approaching to ask if Thanos also wanted to become his little chick. Trying to be helpful, Charlotte ran over to the boys with a jar of water so they could drink. Surprised by how close they were while talking, the blonde man became extremely offended by the boy's offer, who asked if he needed to repeat it. To make sure he heard right, he asked if he really had said little chick, which was the case. Then Jack repeated the question. He didn't really know what little chick meant, but it didn't sound like anything good. In that case, the MC asked if the muscular man would like to be a freeloader, which seemed to make the blonde even more hesitant. Basically, he wanted to turn that teenager into his vassal. When he informed him that he was just a commoner, the mentor received a big "so what" as a response. So Thanos explained that he had nothing of value, much less money. But that didn't matter to the boy. Besides, he had already heard of the Volunteer House and noticed that the young man was very different from the rumors, which was even more irrelevant. Insisting on denying it, the guy asked him to find someone better than a talentless commoner to be his vassal, because he wouldn't be of much help. Jack stared at the guy thoughtfully. It was kind of funny how they worried about him even when he didn't need to, arguing that he wanted to become the best swordsman there, and that's why he wanted him as a vassal. If he thought he wouldn't help, it was because he had already confirmed his own failure. Completely ignoring the mentor, Thanos added that he knew he had no talent for mana. That show of self-deprecation made the protagonist call his attention, saying he was only seeing the bad side of things because he had a talent even greater than mana. Countless people had something like a talent for mana. There were cases of farmers with great skills in that regard who died living normal lives without even letting that talent bloom. Even Jack had dormant talent in mana until he met his master. However, he knew the world he saw was very different from what others saw. He could see the mana veins floating in the air, the same mana that covered his body. But his younger self didn't know what talent was, nor did he have the motivation or thought to put effort into it. That never came naturally, but Thanos had both. That's why he said that not everyone was willing to work that hard. So he shouldn't belittle himself like that, because from what he could see, his talent was greater than anyone's. The words left the muscular man speechless, especially because before he could say anything, an idiot commented, "Wow, this beggar's making friends now." When Jack turned to see who had said that, he saw three brats who shouldn't even be there before the semester started, and the fact that they reminded him of his second brother was enough to make the MC disgusted. Thanos suggested that he leave quickly, being interrupted again by the leader of the three snotty musketeers in front of him. "This beggar must not have heard me. Didn't I tell you not to talk to anyone at the academy?" And he questioned how a mere commoner dared to challenge him, since he believed he had already been beaten enough. The muscular man stepped in front of the protagonist, who remained still, asking again that he leave because this was his problem alone. Realizing the situation, Jack asked if those wounds on his body had been made by the trio. His eyes filled with psychopathy at the conclusion. The red-haired brat spoke again, deducing that the boy had given that high-level potion to the pauper. That intrigued him, because no one but the two of them should have known about the existence of that potion. Crossing his arms, the little one asked if the group had taken the potion he had given the guide, who assured him he would pay for it as soon as possible. He couldn't believe he had been robbed of something he gave the boy just like that. He even thought about cursing the guy in front of him, but preferred to understand what he had to lose to get beaten by trash, like those kids. The new nickname seemed to offend the captain of the bullies. Thanos wasn't interested in arguing about it now and insisted that it was time for Jack to leave before he got hurt. Tired of it all, the MC stated that he wasn't going to leave. Now that he knew they had taken the potion, he was involved in the mess. He ordered the two hidden escorts to come out from wherever they were to handle it, but the redhead played dumb. So without the cooperation of the supposed escorts, Jack prepared to attack, warning that he would take everything the trio had until they showed up. The kingdom of Teslin has 5 true Marquises. Not the nobility granted to circle users, but true nobles who possess some wealth. Among them, the Herman House, which controlled the East, had a very problematic son who would soon graduate from the academy, Dietrich Herman. He had already committed every crime written in a penal code. He assaulted a maid at 13, became a drug user at 14, and lived only for pleasure at 15. There were rumors about him selling substances too, but his future was bright, as he was the heir of his house. So at the academy, surrounded by nobles who were sons of dukes, many watched over him so he could do whatever he pleased. That's why he created a little toy to pass the time. A commoner with no family name who, God knows how, was accepted into the academy. He caught him training alone by chance that day and, as usual, used him as a punching bag. However, amid the stomping, he heard the sound of a bottle breaking. And when he discovered it was a potion, he asked how a beggar commoner like him dared to walk around with something like that. Because of his arrogance, he decided to beat the crap out of Thanos, who didn't fight back at any moment. Back to the present, Jack was destroying all those brats, and Dario was already missing a tooth when he screamed, asking who the hell that boy was. Before he could hit him with a piece of wood, our boy kicked him, disarming him. Charlotte and Valentine were already used to seeing the boy getting into trouble, while Thanos watched with them. He managed to take down all three without any help, and even so, he complained because he still had to go back to training his endurance. When he thought it was over, the redhead dragged himself closer to the MC, stating that he was the eldest son of Marquess House. But Jack was only impressed that his escorts hadn't appeared yet. The boy looked confused, as if he truly didn't know what he was talking about, and he kept rambling about how he would never forgive him and would immediately report his actions to his house. However, the sight of the boy ready to stomp toward him ended his speech of power. Then, as usual, our boy stomped on that sausage water, provoking the kid's bodyguards. They finally appeared, ordering him to stop the torture. They were furious, but Jack quickly said they wouldn't have seen that scene if they had shown up when he asked. The men asked if he had any idea we had just attacked, and the boy didn't really think it was necessary to know. Turning to Thanos, he asked him to remind him of the redhead's name, and the guy whispered, Dietrich Hermann. Even in the worst possible position, the brat had the nerve to face the muscular man and question how he dared to speak his name with the filthy mouth of a commoner. That comment earned him a solid kick in the face, which wouldn't make it any prettier. Jack turned his attention to the hooded men, wanting to know why Thanos had been taking a beating from those three for so long. Full of rage, one of the men charged toward the MC, determined to destroy him. But, as usual, he easily dodged the blow. However, something threw him off. Another henchman was chanting a mana incantation corresponding to the highest class of 6 circle spells. Large-scale explosion magic. If they succeeded, they could wipe out the training field, Thanos, the red-haired boy, and his master together. But our boy feared nothing and began to channel his own blue mana, commenting that the two really did seem like a bunch of criminals. The boy had improved his skills and could now concentrate all of his mana in his hand. Even if the servant wanted to create an explosion, all the magic turned against him. Jack was satisfied with the perfect strike. Everything went exactly as he wanted. However, the man, now in tears, still hadn't given up and was about to attack again. The MC noticed an important detail. The opponent's movement was identical to the first time. The man realized that Jack would attack again with his right hand and by ducking, dodge all the blows. The enemy's movements were far too predictable. Our boy slides under him and hits his chest with a precise punch. After Jack's strike, the servant, even injured, draws his blade and swings it over his head. He steps back slightly, lifts his leg, and knocks the weapon out of the opponent's hands. He was too dumb to even learn a lesson. While he's holding his injured hand, the small one has already circled behind him. A hand wraps around his hooded head, pressing and depriving him of air. His body quickly loses strength, and Jack is surprised by how fast it ends. Now the servant's mana is blocked in his body, and it's unlikely he'll restore it. With a spell like that, a servant could cause serious problems for the academy. With an almost broken voice, the fallen man asks Jack how he removed his magic. Jack replies that he doesn't need to know. What's left is to admit defeat to a 14-year-old boy. Leaning slightly, Jack reminds the man it's time to explain why they mocked Thanos. To them, the commoner was nothing more than a toy, a commoner who couldn't even complain. Jack decides to start the reparations with something simple. He asks for the money back for the elixir. It might sound like a joke, but it would have been better if the men in black cloaks weren't so stupid. Grinding his teeth in rage, the servant asks what the elixir matters now that Jack is an enemy of the Hermann family. But he doesn't care about the family. The elixir was his, and he wants his money back. With an innocent smile, Jack asks if the black-cloaked servant doesn't agree. The elixir cost 40 gold coins, and they took it 5 days ago. It would be fair to return it. He then proposes a deal, 5,000 gold coins extending his palms. But where would men like them get that kind of money? They'd better pray they had something. Fear took over Dietrich when Jack sat beside him, but the boy told him to relax. The only condition is that he hands over everything he has, and even his teeth grind with humiliation. 2,000 in cash and 60 gold coins go into his pockets. Jack became a rich man in an instant. Mockery escapes his lips. How sad, Dietrich. If you didn't have money, things would have ended badly. It's time to ask who he is, since Dietrich had never seen him at the academy before. Amused, Jack pats his head like a puppy, pleased by the question. It's a bit late, but it's time to introduce myself, Jack says, mentioning only his name. The reaction is enthusiastic, as everyone already knows who he is, as if he were a celebrity. I'm Jack Valentir, he says, and someone asks if he's Phelan's younger brother. Now it's clear what kind of friends his older brother, the idiot, had. Our boy doesn't usually lay a hand on children, but kids like him are the exception. With a single blow, he shoves his shoe into Dietrich's mouth, whose face fills with tears. You only have a last name. Without it, you're nothing in this world, Jack spits. The little redhead used the mana of high-level mages to transfer it to himself, but he's nothing but a coward. And he warns that he would have thrown them all into the Academy Lake if they were a bit older. Jack's face is furious as he tells them to remember his words and informs them that he lives in a mansion outside the school. If you want revenge, that's where you'll find me. But next time, I won't stop, he threatens. He removes his foot from Dietrich's mouth, noticing that the man had wet himself in fear. Calling the little girl, Jack invites her to go with him and she agrees immediately. Passing by Thanos, he touches his hand and says the offer still stands. We have a great cook at home. You can eat meat every day, he jokes. Birds circle above the Academy courtyard, and Jack decides to go watch the fireworks festival. In the province of Istanbul, the festival takes place 2 or 3 days before the start of the semester. It's a great opportunity to welcome new students even after an unpleasant day. The Academy gathers the Empire's elite, including emperors, dukes, and princesses, where graduating guarantees a promising future, though that status would soon come to an end. Cutting a piece of meat, Jack reflects on the past 4 or 5 years. The name of the Teslan Empire was erased from the face of the earth, and he secretly hopes everyone dies soon. Charlotte enjoys the dessert while Jack's mentor pulls him out of his dark thoughts. She asks if he said something out loud, but he quickly denies it, confused about what she's talking about. The mentor refers to the recent attacks on the Academy, openly questioning the effectiveness of the security measures. Although Article 1 of the special law declares all students equal, she notes how ideologies distort over time. With visible displeasure, the mentor admits to having hidden something important: dragon blood and bones. Upon mentioning the Teslan Empire, she triggers in Jack the urge to reveal his past, but he decides to remain silent. The night sky shines with explosions of color when Charlotte interrupts the MC's distraction with questions about his abilities. He replies that he accumulated a lot of experience over the years, prompting her to ask if he had killed many people. Jack calmly confirms, revealing that he came from the future, more precisely 20 years ago. He mentions that Ron was the first to learn this truth, and that his later death was no accident. Offering more truths, the boy says that in this current life, it was the first time he saw Charlotte. In his past life, he only met her in the monster forest, the last refuge of the vampires. When asked about his interest in her, Jack explains that he saw in the girl someone who also wants to fight. He senses a painful past and a heart eager for change in his new disciple. Announcing they would begin training the next day, the boy visibly excites the girl. His plan includes creating a mana heart for her and testing her control, which clearly surprises her. Under the fireworks light, Charlotte thanks him with a glowing face while Jack smiles in satisfaction. He knows the future challenges will be difficult, but decides that now is not the time to think about them. Meanwhile, in his quarters, Dietrich destroys his room in a fit of uncontrollable rage. The noble repeats the protagonist's name with hatred, trembling in fury as he remembers the boy's terrifying stare. Amid smashed objects, he screams to himself, questioning how a mere 14-year-old boy managed to make him feel such fear. Vowing revenge against the boy, his labored breathing and uncoordinated movements reveal his complete emotional breakdown. On the second day of the semester, the young hero searches for Ron, driven by longing for his friend's delicious steaks. His body begins to tremble inexplicably as sudden dizziness hits him. The red sauce Charlotte used is, in fact, human juice. With a pale face revealing his discomfort, the protagonist still asks the girl if she's enjoying the meal. She responds with genuine enthusiasm, but the boy's attention is drawn to Thanos, sitting alone and dejected at the gate. Sensing the young man's presence, he briefly lifts his head before lowering it again, murmuring a request for help. The hero immediately invites the boy inside, offering food and shelter, a gesture that makes the blonde burst into tears. Not wanting to embarrass the emotional young man, the clever boy jokes that the cook must have overdone the onions. The next day, Thanos tries to apologize for his behavior, but the generous boy reassures him that it's no problem. The protagonist consciously avoids asking about the reasons, respecting the boy's privacy, though he suspects the influence of some elixir. While watching the muscular guy train with impressive dedication, the young master is interrupted by Charlotte's arrival. Dressed properly for training, the determined girl shows she is ready for the promised lesson. With a smile on his lips, the experienced teacher also prepares, beginning yet another journey of learning with his devoted student. By late afternoon, Charlotte was completely exhausted, lying on the ground without strength. Jack praised her, saying she did an amazing job that day, but a weak groan from the girl shows she couldn't take any more. Suddenly, she asks excitedly what it all means now that she finally learned how to use mana. With a gentle smile, the boy responds positively and congratulates Charlotte on her success. He had suspected it already, but now he was sure. The girl was truly incredible. After all, she was using mana at a high level as if she already had experience. Creating her first mana circle in just 10 hours of training was an exceptional result for a beginner. Charlotte casually accepts the suggestion to end the session there and tries to get up to head to the mansion. However, after a few shaky steps, she collapses onto a bench, instantly falling asleep from sheer exhaustion. The mentor asks the boy if he plans to tell Charlotte that it usually takes 2 to 3 days for beginners to create a circle. If it were up to him, he would have asked the girl to be his student immediately. although without his help she would have needed at least a full day. A magic circle forms under her feet, drawing mana from the air to create barriers and store energy. By transferring part of his own mana to Charlotte, the protagonist greatly facilitated the process, although that method doesn't work for everyone. The boy admits it was hard for him at first too, making her achievement even more impressive. What intrigues the mentor is that Jack asks for nothing in return, acting with pure generosity and helping her. Noticing Thanos, the boy comments in surprise that he's crying again, making the young man quickly wipe his tears. The master observes his suspicious behavior, easily deducing that he feels limited and frustrated with his progress. Thanos is visibly depressed, unable to properly answer whether he has given up, while envy burns in his heart. He hopes at least the girl doesn't have a talent for swordsmanship, so he won't be inferior in absolutely everything. Jack asks if he thought it would be easy to become the greatest knight of the Western continent, making Thanos fall to his knees in tears. The protagonist sighs heavily, looking at the huge man. How could someone so grand be such a crybaby? With his questions, Jack tries to cheer the man up, saying the best knight wouldn't give up because of a girl. Gently caressing the blonde's head, he tells Thanos he can still achieve his dream, but he will need to persist. It's the first time someone truly believes in him, awakening emotions never felt before in the knight's heart. No one ever took his dream of becoming the best knight seriously. Everyone laughed at him for being so naive, but he never gave up. Jack understands that situation, since he went through something similar in his family, so he asks what the problem is. Thanos extends his hands and grabs the boy's, thanking him for believing in him, something that touched him deeply. Without showing much, Jack simply advises him to keep trying because acquired skills never betray. While thinking about how to help the knight, the snap of branches is heard behind him, as if someone stepped on them. Thanos' huge body realizes that the boy is alert to something, but who could be there at that moment? A familiar feeling invades Jack, and he doesn't like it at all. It's as if he's on everyone's radar when he's most vulnerable. It was like an unwanted guest had arrived at the worst possible time. Thanos watches as Jack fixes his gaze on the horizon, his eyes shining with battle thirst. Boy asks him to take the girl and stand behind him, a request that leaves the blonde hesitant, but he agrees and quickly stands up. Our boy had already deduced who was coming toward them and comments that he knew the visitor would die, but didn't imagine they'd come so soon. His eyes scan the area quickly until he spots the observer, while the 5 men who had been watching the group were already lying on the ground. They weren't moving, but they were breathing, apparently unconscious, while Charlotte continued sleeping peacefully in Thanos' arms. The white-haired man informs that he brought the girl just as the mentor arrives at the scene, rubbing her eyes and yawning. Still unaware of the situation, the girl asks the boss if they're going to have dinner when suddenly Dietrich and several cloaked men appear around them. Some are positioned on the ground and others in the tree branches, all with threatening expressions while Dietrich flaunts a disturbing smile. He greets Jack Valentier, saying it's been a long time since they last met, calling him by his full name with a provocative tone. Jack had already channeled mana around him, assuming a defensive stance and warning Dietrich not to come any closer. The redhead was the future Marquis of the Great Eastern Province, so he knew well that this world is ruled by power, and that soon he would control his family's power. He questions why let Jack live, knowing he could cause trouble with the Duke of Asenbul, but he has a plan. Dietrich claims that Jack attacked first and has witnesses, which would spark a conflict between the Herman and Valentier families. At his side is a man wearing a plague mask identified as Bentaman, master of the Pentanil Guild and a Ninth Circle user. As strong as Jack is, he couldn't defeat a master of the Ninth Circle, as Dietrich explains to the mercenary. His target was just Jack, but now the target is in open terrain near the mansion with Charlotte and Thanos. Dietrich asks if there's anything else the mercenary needs to know, while Bentaman confirms that the blonde girl is forming a mana heart. He sighs in relief, thinking it's great they stayed there for 9 hours, since the mana heart formation would take at least 2 days. Among his team is a cook and 5 servants whose locations have already been confirmed. They would be eliminated when ordered. They prefer to avoid direct conflict with the Asenbul family, whose knights are busy with other matters. People near the property shout for water as a fire had started in the Duke's basement just before their arrival. Everyone is busy putting out the flames and won't be able to send reinforcements as the plague mask informs his men. Everything worked perfectly for them, and they are ready when Jack shouts that it's time to attack, initiating the mission. With a hand gesture, dozens of warriors charge into action, shouting "Advance," initiating a special order worth 500,000 gold. Dietrich proudly thinks Jack Baylor is finished when suddenly little Jack is protected by Thanos' broad back. The blonde asks the master to flee while he holds them off, his trembling hands barely able to grip his heavy sword. He thanks Jack for believing in him and takes the blame for the situation, promising to hold them back so they can escape. Their willingness to protect him is unexpected for Jack, who begins to smile, finding them adorably foolish. Where else would he find people like this, he thinks, feeling a warm emotion so different from his past life where he died alone. Pushing his shoulders back, he steps forward and tells them not to worry and to stay behind him, promising to protect everyone. With confident steps, he approaches Dietrich, thinking that if they want to die, nothing can be done. The boy begins to gather mana to blow them all up, but is interrupted by his mentor, who pinches his cheek and asks him to stop. She descends to the ground in front of Dietrich, leaving Jack confused as to whether she intends to eliminate them herself. The arrogant noble does not understand why the doll moves and speaks when her eyes begin to glow like lanterns. Her hair rises as particles of light fly toward Dietrich, making him close his eyes and complain that he cannot see. An adult woman now stands before him, enveloped in smoke that covers her, revealing a great heroine from the past. The one who raised the continent and humanity to the top of the pyramid returns after a 400-year hiatus, leaving Dietrich perplexed. Tilting his head, the protagonist shows satisfaction at his mentor's return and tries to greet her. Before he can finish his sentence, she punches him in the face, causing a cry of pain as he falls to the cold ground. Rubbing his injured face, the boy asks why he received that, not understanding the reason for the aggression. The one explains that it is punishment for his inappropriate behavior, reminding him how he ignored her opinion and dragged her out of the cave. At that time, the young man did not care about her feelings or words, acting selfishly. Even while being scolded, he remained seated with a satisfied expression, admiring her and thinking about how much he missed her. After agreeing with the punishment, the boy points to Dietrich and firmly demands that he hand over his coat. The noble clearly is not pleased with the request, but after being publicly humiliated, he relents and throws the garment. Carefully dressing his mentor with the coat, the boy comments that it's cold outside, showing concern. He states that he does not regret taking her out of the cave, holding on to his conviction despite the criticism. When asked again if he regrets his actions, he insists that he did what was necessary and that everything turned out fine. The mentor asks if he wished to die peacefully in that place, to which he replies that he knows her better than that. The boy argues that people are like animals following desires and that his master expected a different world. There is no distinction between humans and other races, and he knew she secretly wanted to leave the cave that day. His protector had made mistakes in the past, trusting those she shouldn't have, and ended up trapped in her own creation. Dietrich and his men show visible fear in the face of the situation, while the mentor seems to feel a debt to her pupil. The young man initially barely understands her words, thinking she only saw him as an annoying child. Happy to hear what she said, he accepts the disguised compliment, watching as black smoke begins to swirl in her hand. The woman powerfully gathers mana, apologizing in advance for what she will do since they came to kill her student. Dietrich, in a panic, orders his men to attack immediately, not understanding the danger they face. The master recites an ancient spell as black resin drips to the ground and stains the sky, distorting the surrounding reality. The protagonist can barely see the mercenaries through the purple mist gathering above the woman's head. She continues the incantation, announcing the return of the resin to the world as a shadowy skull appears behind her. Somewhere far away in the Tulkun Empire, the master feels a sudden disturbance, as if he had experienced that unpleasant sensation before. For a moment, he wonders if it was just an illusion. Something is clearly wrong with the flow of mana around him. In the Black Sea, intense discussions take place among hidden figures, completely certain in their convictions. The past and present soul energy are undeniably identical, belonging to Valentine Milos as evidenced by the magical traces. The dragon still carries in his chest the wound left by that woman, whose memory haunts the cloaked man who tries in vain to forget her. The admirable longevity of the woman who has ruled their world for 410 years defies all logic, leaving them perplexed. The protagonist's amber eyes reflect the mentor's spell as the black tar transforms into a skull that opens its jaws. The piercing scream of the skull hits Dietrich and his group, where only the mage's black silhouette with flaming eyes can be seen. A shockwave of the attack scatters all who dared to advance, leaving the noble with his mind clouded by pure terror. A strange sensation in his legs alerts him. Around him, mercenaries writhe in agony as they watch their limbs disintegrate into dust. When his own legs begin to vanish, Dietrich finally understands that he is facing inevitable death. His trembling hands start to crumble as a skeletal hand reaches out toward him, making him crawl backward in panic. In desperation, he offers fortunes to save his life, but the mentor ignores his increasingly frantic pleas with disdain. His body dissolves into particles that fly into a glowing portal in the sky, while Charlotte covers her mouth in shock. The girl sees Valentine as a final boss, frightened when the woman extends her hand only to gently pat her head. The powerful mage introduces herself as the mentor of that stupid student, asking them to take care of him, when Thanos surprises everyone. The blonde places a hand on his chest and corrects her. Jack is not stupid, making the mentor smile and admit her mistake. Playfully, the boy activates his childish narcissistic side, being pushed with a finger by the master, who laughs at his immaturity. Before they leave, Jack tells Charlotte to drink his juice stored in the kitchen and asks Thanos to take care of the unconscious ones. When the little vampire complains about pain in her legs, asking to be carried, the blonde sighs but eventually gives in. As they say goodbye, the protagonist comments on the loyalty of his friends, smiling before asking the mentor about the important matter. Valentine Milos stands before the protagonist with a serious expression, revealing that she has reflected deeply on his earlier words. She asks if the boy has already forgotten what he said to the man, even though she was present during the entire conversation through Charlotte's arms. The mentor had heard everything about dragon blood and bones, raising suspicions about a connection to immortality research. Her expression shows concern as she considers that the heterogeneous experiments may be an extension of those forbidden studies. The boy nods in confirmation, stating that she is on the right path with her logical deductions. He explains that humanity's desire for eternal life has always been accompanied by the wish to maintain youth and health. During archaic research on immortality, an elderly scientist proposed a radical approach. Instead of living forever, why not live like dragons? Long-lived races like vampires and dragons have radically different biology, with cells aging at a different rate. The protagonist describes chaotic laboratories with blood-stained papers, where cross-species experiments yielded partial results. The heterogeneous combination failed to produce immortality, but allowed humans to absorb powers from orcs and elves at a terrible cost. Recipients of these powers only gained 5 to 10 years of life before dying tragically. In a heavy voice, the boy reveals that the Tulkun Empire resumed these experiments, extending hybrid survival to 30 years. The mentor shows visible guilt, believing she had exterminated everyone involved 4 centuries ago. She vividly describes how she entered the laboratory alone, bare feet on the cold floor covered in documents. She remembers burning every paper and executing every agonizing hybrid creature crawling her path. Her face contorts with sadness as she admits her fatal mistake. She should have killed the Dragon Lords too. 2 of those beings betrayed their own kind, likely providing descendants as test subjects for experiments. When asked which specific dragons were used, the protagonist has a ready answer. Only 2 Dragon Lords in all existence can manipulate soul energy, and their hair shares that gift. The combination of this lineage with 10th Circle mages created abominations capable of breaking magical barriers. The mentor, after absorbing this information, asked a crucial question about her pupil's future goals. She, as a relic of the past, still feels connected to the world and curious about its direction. The boy reveals his plans to reach the 5th or 6th circle within a year and invade the Tulkun Empire during the school break. His mission will be identical to hers: destroy laboratories and eliminate all involved in the experiments. Meanwhile, poor Thanos struggles to carry all the unconscious servants at once. The mentor pulls at her sleeve with a thoughtful gesture and questions whether they really need to wait for the break to act. Her question surprises the disciple, who hesitates before responding, confirming to Valentine that he is genuinely her student. With a sharp look, the boy reminds her that she herself promised not to interfere in worldly affairs, treating this as a personal duty. Now she reconsiders, believing in her obligation to ensure the experiments are eradicated once and for all, even if she must act directly. This means she intends to depart immediately for the Tulkun Empire, and nothing can stop her after all. As a mentor, her authority is unquestionable. Destroying that laboratory will cause a massive crisis among radicals seeking to unify the continent through interracial experiments. The protagonist realizes that she has overcome the sorrows of the past, while he still carries that resentment alone. He then makes an unexpected request, that she open a dimensional space to retrieve a specific sword. Without hesitation, the woman waves her hand, creating a purple rift in the air from which emerges a blade of singular beauty. The Solarian sword, forged by the king of the dwarves and crafted by mermaids, shines familiarly in the young man's hands as he handles it with intimacy. Valentine also pulls out a white mask with intricate patterns, capable of concealing identities and manipulating mana flows. When questioned about its origin, she dodges, vaguely recalling having bought it in a market ages ago. When he puts it on, the boy jokes about improper uses, like spying on men in bathhouses, receiving a punch on the head for his insolence. Upon providing teleportation coordinates, his face lights up with recognition. They point to the former capital of the Gunnar Empire. The mentor's homeland 4 centuries ago, now in ruins, housing the secret laboratory beneath a historical landmark. As she opens the portal, she extends her hand, asking if he's ready, receiving an enthusiastic laugh in response. The scene then cuts to a distant laboratory, where a scientist boasts about praise he received from Hank Beckerman himself. The doctor shows nervousness when questioned about human experiments, defending himself with promising results in animals. His explanation about cellular activation is interrupted by an authoritative gesture. Hanks only wants to know when it will actually begin. Rubbing his hands anxiously, the scientist claims he urgently needs test subjects with magical talent. When asked what he will call these hybrid creatures, he answers without hesitation: Half-Bloods, a name that makes Hankis smile in satisfaction. Before leaving, the protagonist turns and questions the doctor about any appointments scheduled at the location. The scientist, rubbing his chin thoughtfully, denies any planned meetings as the two stand face to face. Hankis senses an unknown flow of mana, and before he can identify its source as the master, the ground beneath his feet begins to tremble. The next moment, the floor violently collapses, with Hankis reacting at the last second as furniture flies in all directions. The noble tries to defend himself with magic, but the doctor's screams echo through the place. His protection is useless against such force. Blood gushes from his mouth as he tries in vain to comprehend the situation, with Hankis' servant asking if the attack is over. The warning comes too late as new flames emerge, threatening to consume the unprotected doctor caught in the line of fire. Hanks, his body trembling from the effort, conjures one last magical shield before being violently thrown back. His shield holds, but the impact leaves him coughing up juice that splashes in all directions as he clutches his chest. As he turns his head, he sees the lifeless body of the doctor responsible for the experiments on the torchlit lower floor. The scene is macabre. Dirty bodies fall to the ground, fluid continuously dripping over the stones. The protagonist points in horror to the chained dragon, whose juice drips incessantly, awakening his murderous fury. When asked about his plans, he smiles with satisfaction and asks to take control of the situation, receiving approval from the mentor. Valentine extends her hand and conjures hellfire, identical to the one that hit Hinkes earlier, illuminating the dark surroundings. The boy comments that the spell remains impressive, partially covering his face from the intense heat of the flames. They are now on the third floor among ruins of a civilization forgotten for centuries, while the mentor checks if there's anything left to destroy. The protagonist approaches the chained dragon, closely observing the beam piercing his chest, provoking a warning growl. He recalls how in his past life he had found the creature in an even more pitiful state, bathed in fluid and begging for death. This time, smiling, he unsheathes the Solarian sword with determination, ignoring the beast's intimidating roars. His movements are precise and swift, the blade drawing arcs in the air, reducing the chains to metal pieces that fall at his feet. The dragon collapses to the ground, exhausted, while the boy watches it with compassion and extends a hand to caress its head. 18 years have passed since their first encounter. The protagonist leans down, gently embracing the scaly neck. He whispers words of comfort into the creature's ear, acknowledging its prolonged suffering and extreme exhaustion. Jack watches the smiling dragon, recalling how the same creature once begged for death. Silence weighs in the room as the boy questions whether the dragon wishes to go on living as experimental material. Abandoned by its own parents, its wounded paws pierced with stakes, the creature is nothing more than valuable livestock. Tears stream from the dragon's eyes upon hearing how its skin was used for armor and its blood for cruel experiments. Jack continues, describing how constant torture would drive the creature mad until it lost all will to live. He offers an alternative, a new beginning in a distant place, where the nameless dragon could own its destiny. With a weak voice at first, the dragon begins to murmur, until letting out a powerful roar, declaring its desire to live. The boy contrasts this scene with his past, when he had to kill a previous version of this creature out of mercy. As he proposes to take it home, Jack turns to the mentor, who responds with silence and a nod, also captivated. The moment is interrupted by Hanks, whose furious voice makes the dragon tremble in fear upon recognizing his tormentor. Ignoring the threats, the pair continues their conversation as if the noble didn't exist, further inflaming his rage. When Hanks advances with 10th circle magic, Jack merely smiles, provoking greater fury in the man who considers himself the strongest. The boy's expression shifts to a murderous gaze, releasing energy pressure that makes the adult instinctively retreat. With a precise knee strike, he breaks the opponent's sword, who stammers in shock upon recognizing the energy of darkness. As the student advances relentlessly, the mentor watches intently, without interfering in the one-sided battle. The scene turns to chaos as the boy, driven by contained fury, reduces the enemy's weapon to shards. The scene ends with the noble being hurled against the wall, while the dragon watches everything with renewed hope. Hank's body leaves a massive crater in the wall before rolling unconscious across the floor. Jack approaches with a disappointed expression, barely believing that the strongest man on the continent would fall so easily. Clutching the broken sword, Hank tries to get up and asks in a trembling voice who that unknown man is. The boy merely laughs, making the noble shudder. That scornful laughter sounds more terrifying than any threat. In prophetic tone, Jack declares that he knows someone, the knave Thanos, who will one day become the knight capable of defeating the blonde. Furious at the prophecy, the noble attacks even unarmed, while the protagonist remains still, sword calmly pointed. His amber eyes reflect malice as they shift between the dragon and the opponent, analyzing the scene with coldness. When Hank tries to draw another weapon, Jack moves swiftly. A precise strike sends the noble's hand flying through the air, juice gushing out. The boy's terrifying gaze seems to say that Hankes is still too weak, provoking both pity and contempt. Turning the noble into a punching bag, Jack delivers precise kicks until the man collapses on the stone floor. While cleaning the bloodstained sword, he suggests that Hankes gets stronger. It will be more interesting when they kill him. Jack reveals intimate knowledge about the faction of the Prince of Tulkan, whom Hankes serves, predicting his bloody end. Upon noticing Hankes' disciple trembling in fear, the boy recalls memories from his past life. He remembers when he previously killed Hanks and a knight, probably Marangos, tried to avenge him, losing his head. With twisted glee, Jack uses the glowing chains that once restrained the dragon to amputate the disciple's arm. The mentor asks if he's finished, receiving confirmation, but with a note about one thing worth taking. Teleporting to the mansion's courtyard, Jack removes the mask with a bored air before letting out a restrained laugh. His expression alternates between amused and utterly indifferent, as if already accustomed to the violence. Turning to the dragon, he asks its name. The animal, still on the ground, lifts its gaze and murmurs in a trembling voice. Shell Bahamut, syllables come out haltingly, filled with restrained emotion after years of suffering. The boy gently strokes the dragon's scales, questioning the meaning of the surname given by the parents who abandoned it. Your name is now just Shell, Jack declares firmly, staring at the creature with a gaze that blends protection and authority. The dragon, now called Shell, accepts being taken to a room where its wounds are treated before falling asleep, exhausted on soft cushions. Valentine Milos is sitting cross-legged, questions her apprentice about his plans regarding the Dragon Lords. The boy responds with uncertainty about who should bow first, suggesting it would be interesting if the strong came to the weak. His eyes shine with an expression the mentor recognizes as care, the same care he shows for her. Jack does not hide his admiration for the woman who surpassed the human lifespan by 4 centuries and built the foundations of the current world. Kneeling, he holds her hands and promises to deal with the Dragon Lords when the time comes, sparing her from further sacrifices. After a long silence, Valentine agrees, rising to take a bath while Jack observes her dusty cloak hanging on the rack. When he sees her return from the bath with damp hair over her shoulders, the boy showers her with compliments, receiving a recommendation to bathe as well. Upon removing his shirt, he reveals a child's torso marked with scars, using elixir to heal recent wounds, already showing some dependency. When asked about his plans for the night, he sits on a chair by her bed, responding evasively until he notices her concern. Momentarily turning into a whining child, he exaggerates his pains, revealing that Ron told him how she watched over him for 3 days. Now it's his turn to care for the mentor who always loved to sleep, watching her peaceful face as he covers her with a blanket. In the silence of the night, he reflects on what it would have been like to meet her 400 years ago when she was born, a thought that makes him blush. Kneeling on the bed, he gazes at the one the world calls a terrible necromancer, but who to him is the most beautiful sight. Many hours before the current events in the dungeons of the Duchy of Ulz, a shackled man questions the Lord of the Tower whether it was wrong to have spied on the leader for 10 years. The leader always showed care and affection for him, making the betrayal even graver in the eyes of the Tower Lord. The prisoner smiles insolently despite being bound and without his man of circle, showing inexplicable confidence. He taunts the Tower Lord, asking whether he truly ignores the truth or merely pretends not to know. Brutus suggests they reflect on the last 10 years, questioning why so many 10th Circle mages abandoned the kingdom. The tone becomes serious when he mentions the false pretenses used to recruit mages supposedly to clear monster-infested forests. The Tower Lord threatens that the prisoner will talk once the torture begins, but receives only hysterical laughter in return. The prisoner's confidence raises questions. Why had he not been tortured already if he was considered a traitor? His untouched appearance after 5 days in prison contrasts with the treatment usually given to the kingdom's enemies. The Tower Lord begins to wonder whether the kingdom itself is already corrupted from within as he ascends the stairs, disturbed. 4 hours later, a mysterious fire breaks out in the dungeons at the exact moment Dietrich plans to attack Jack. Upon arriving, the Tower Lord finds only ashes and assumes Brutus burned to death. The next morning, the presence of the dragon Shell causes mixed reactions among the protagonist's allies. Charlotte shows discomfort upon seeing the creature, while Thamos nervously points and asks if it is really a dragon. The protagonist explains that Shell is different from the monsters they know, trying to calm everyone down. The dragon appears frightened, trembling like a cornered animal, until the boy soothes him with a gentle touch. He assures Shell that no one will hurt him while reflecting on how established truths are not always absolute. Indeed, an ordinary sword would never be able to wound a dragon, as these terrifying creatures are called blessed beasts for a reason. Most likely, it was Hannes Beggar who used Shell's body for cruel experiments, but the protagonist did get payback with a kick. Naturally, the dragon now fears the boy after witnessing what he did to his tormentor, looking at him with strangely reverent eyes. The boy reflects that Shell seems to see him differently now, as if his appearance had changed after sleep, though he still considers himself attractive. As he removes his hands from the dragon's face, the boy notices how the creature bows its head in submission, a stark contrast to its past existence. In his previous life, Shell was so broken he merely lay in puddles of fluid, without strength or hope, though the current situation isn't much better. The protagonist feels deep pity as he strokes the scaly face, estimating that the dragon is about 8 in human developmental years. He ironically realizes that only unhappy and needy creatures seem to gather around him, forming an involuntary circle of the downtrodden. The mentor then channels healing magic into the dragon, leaving the 3 onlookers in awe as they watch its paws regenerate within seconds. But the process doesn't end there. Valentine continues the transformation, causing Shell to scream in anguish as his limbs twist into a human form. Emerging from the metamorphosis is a delicate-looking girl, making Charlotte cling to Thanos in fright as the mentor smiles in satisfaction. The protagonist can't help but lose his gaze in the mentor's new form, who quickly brings him back to reality by reminding him of the semester ceremony. He warns the now human Shell that they'll return soon, instructing her to rest while remembering to ask about dragon diet. Upon mentioning meat, the girl's eyes light up in recognition, prompting the boy to order the cook to prepare a good steak. Before leaving, he suggests she enjoy the view from the rooftop if she gets bored, thinking about her future as she waits. Flashbacks from a distant past come to his mind when the academy was founded in the newly created kingdom of Teslin. The director gives an unexpectedly grim speech to the students, warning that even powerful kingdoms decline, differing from the optimism the protagonist remembered. His talk about hidden shadows and internal divisions seems prophetic, especially after the destruction of the laboratory the previous day. The old man clearly possesses insider information, possibly from Brutus, as he describes how radicals from the 10th Circle will conquer Tulkun in blood. His melancholic tone contrasts with the vigor of the ancestors who built the kingdom, leaving the students confused by the seemingly contradictory message. As the protagonist watches his classmates absorb the speech, he realizes that each of them carries the potential to change the course of this dark future. After the ceremony, the academy students disperse through the courtyard, resuming their daily activities. Jack stretches wearily after sitting for too long, noting that there are no classes or events scheduled for the first day. He considers visiting the old director to thank him for the house he received, as he genuinely liked the gift. Suddenly, his gaze catches a familiar silhouette in the crowd, prompting him to shout excitedly the name of his older brother. The brother is startled by the unexpected voice, while Jack waves cheerfully, asking when he had arrived. The response is a dry murmur, "Yesterday," as the older brother dodges his touch, keeping his distance. Ignoring the coldness, Jack pats him on the back, insisting he at least greet him politely. He argues that they share the same blood, but his gaze becomes threatening when the brother remains reluctant. In a low tone only the older one hears, Jack whispers that he could dismember him right there if he didn't show the minimum respect. Immediately after, he shifts to a relaxed attitude in front of the others, loudly saying he didn't want to delay him. With a friendly pat on the shoulder, Jack lets him go join his friends, but Phelan runs off as if fleeing. Charlotte arrives beside Jack, observing the scene and asking if that was a friend, receiving a negative response. She is confused when he mentions they are blood brothers, prompting Jack to explain that family ties don't necessarily mean affection. The girl then gives an intrigued look, pressing to know what she represents to him with her cute expression. Jack is flustered by the direct question, joking if she was already entering puberty with such deep inquiries. His sincere answer, as she is indeed family, lights up the little vampire's face, even though he usually doesn't show feelings openly. To the protagonist, family are those he chooses to protect and care for, now including the mentor, Thanos, and Charlotte. Meanwhile, Phelan quickly distances himself from the group of friends who comment on the brothers' strange behavior. A friend notes that Jack seems to have psychologically dominated the older one, completely reversing the dynamic they used to have. Phelan doesn't understand his own reaction. Why does he still feel fear of the brother he once saw only as a toy? These thoughts make him quicken his pace, confusing his companions who suspect some kind of mood disorder. In a burst of anger, Phelan turns back to confront Jack, but freezes when he faces his brother's confident and dangerous posture. Unable to articulate the challenge he had planned, he averts his gaze and lowers his head, defeated before even beginning. Jack remarks with disdain that he has become boring, noting how his brother trembles even after overcoming his fear of water. Something new was pulsing in his chest, a mix of hatred, fear, and an unknown emotion he had never felt for anyone before. That was why he hadn't realized he was now hurt, grabbing the cold cookies while reflecting on Brutus's death. The news didn't surprise him at all. On the contrary, he questioned the old director about what exactly the problem was. The old man was perplexed by the boy's indifference, who clearly didn't care whether Brutus was alive or dead. Realizing the conversation wasn't going anywhere, Jack changed the subject to thank him for the property, especially praising the chef whose dishes had charmed Charlotte. The director's silence about Brutus's death remained strange, but before Jack could leave, the old man called him back. With cookies nearly falling from his mouth, the boy heard the unexpected proposal: transfer to the Magic College, clearly influenced by the tower's owner. Jack revealed he never intended to attend regular classes, but the director warned about changes in academy rules next year. The old man proposed a deal. If he switched to magic, his course load would be reduced, but Jack insisted on only 1 day of classes per week. After negotiating, they settled on 2 days, with the boy making clear that he only wanted the diploma, not the knowledge. His true motivation came to light: to access the academy's treasure, where 400-year-old magical weapons were kept for graduates. Although he doubted the sword he needed was still there, Jack considered the possibility of Bellamy Craig forging a superior weapon. Realizing that both Bellamy and the director wanted to recruit him, Jack found the situation amusing. He was not subordinate material. When the director suggested he could make him a marquis if he proved his talent, Jack burst into laughter, clutching his stomach. After calming down, the boy politely declined the noble title. Becoming a marquis had never been part of his plans. The boy wants to leave, but the old man calls him again. He apparently knows something, as he asks if any incident occurred in the village yesterday. Recalling the servants passed out on the floor, he claims that nothing happened. The director's questions sound like an interrogation. Jack explains he went to check on the employees because they hadn't prepared the food. Thanos took everyone inside so they wouldn't stay out on the street. He didn't ask what happened, but it seemed to be a fight among them. To the old man, it sounds like a flimsy excuse. The director accepts the explanation with a paternal comment: kids grow up fighting anyway. Jack leans forward to leave. As he exits the office, a painting catches his eye. It shows a girl striking a horned man. Valentine remains in the office. The director, hearing her, reflects deeply. His political instincts, sharpened over decades, are not easily deceived. In his entire life, the old man had met hundreds of aristocrats and kings, but never felt an aura like Valentine Milos's. The master touches the flowers near the window, saying the director's speech was impressive. Her movements are unusual. Even the way she approaches the window is singular. The director is certain she is a unique woman without equal. Valentine suggests that the position of general would suit him better than that of academic director. Perhaps in the past, when he still fought. Like Bellamy recently mentioned, there are many talents in the Tesla empire. Can he, as director, protect them all? Her majestic gaze captivates the director. She asks if he has thought about it. Lost in his response, he is interrupted. The door bursts open. Jack has returned to fetch his mentor. She complains about the oaf, saying she was already leaving. The boy justifies that he was worried about her delay. On the streets, Valentine draws all eyes as she passes. Vendors offer bread and tea, but she declines with creative excuses. As of today, I'm allergic to flour. I've had enough tea already. The refusals disappoint the merchants, but she seems used to such attention. Perhaps the director wanted to make her his student. It's all written on his face. Suddenly, Valentine asks a strange question. Do you trust Director Rommel? The answer is clearer than ever. Jack trusts no one except his own people, his so-called family. Valentine should be concerned. They and the old director have a different relationship based on mutual necessity. The mentor fully understands that he would never allow himself to be used as a pawn in this game of interests. They came because Jack brought her, but she still doesn't understand the purpose of this visit to the place in question. Their destination is the Alaides Guild, a strange place for their goals, considering a main target is Jack's money. This is the guild of mercenaries and hunters, where any service can be hired for the right price. The boy knows that a mage from the Men's Circle would cost much more than it seems, probably the same as what Dietrich paid. But what happens when both the contractor and the executor die? That's exactly the reason for their visit. A friendly attendant receives them, addressing the mentor first, but Jack takes the lead in the conversation. He asks to speak to the manager, demanding that all the money be returned, accompanied by a coded message. Last night, Ninth Circle, assassination. These words make the girl go pale and let out an involuntary scream. The colleague beside her quickly covers her mouth when she almost says Jack's name, to which he reacts with a sharp smile. Why would she recognize him? His gaze becomes threatening as he leans over the counter, approaching dangerously. The girl then blurts out the name Dietrich, prompting her companion to try calming her down, but the trap was already set. Jack realizes Dietrich's stupidity. Instead of confronting him directly, he used the guild as an intermediary. The situation has completely changed. The staff now tremble, unable to provide useful information under pressure. The boy gives a 5-minute ultimatum to bring the leader, flipping in Hourglass as a countdown. If time runs out, he will erase the Alaides Guild from the map, regardless of its reputation or influence. Valentine seems confused by her pupil's determination to destroy an entire established organization. Jack explains that many of these guilds in the Empire are mere intermediaries, not truly independent institutions. His real motivation is to find out who Dietrich hired, but the attendant's reaction has already revealed a lot. She clearly recognized him and was shocked to see him alive, a sign that she knew about the assassination contract. Using a guild to kill an aristocrat is like announcing the crime to the world. That's why Jack thought Dietrich would act personally. Everyone in the guild looks at him as if seeing a walking corpse, including those who refer the job to Dietrich. The office door opens, revealing the manager calmly eating grapes until he hears the news of the visit. His expression twists upon hearing Jack volunteer, his eyes darkening in disbelief. How is he still breathing? The attendant, clutching her dress nervously, repeats the boy's threats about annihilating the guild in 5 minutes. In 34 years of his career, the leader has never faced a situation like this. The Pentanal Guild, the Plague Mask Assassins. They never fail. Their leader is a mage of the Ninth Circle, yet the target is still alive. There is no time to deliberate. When the hourglass sand is almost gone, the leader finally appears, nervously rubbing his hands on his pants. He introduces himself as Avero, leader of the Alaides Guild, offering apologies for the delay with a voice trying to hide his fear. The two sit face to face, with Jack politely refusing the tea offered and going straight to the point. The guild leader, Avero, asks with false innocence what business brings the young gentleman there. Could he be interested in making a request? Jack crosses his arms and explains that this is only the beginning of the conversation. His sharp eyes already notice the gleam of greed in Avero's gaze as he thinks about the money involved in this little visit. But the leader's hope vanishes when Jack calmly mentions the attempted assassination against his life a night before. He directly questions whether a contract to kill him was made through the guild, something that Avero confirms without hesitation, since imperial law protects guilds as legal intermediaries in this type of process. Jack understands the system. Mercenaries need work, clients need willing hands, and the guilds connect both for a fee. Arabs is one of the largest organizations of its kind in the Tesla Empire, with rumors that its true leader may have ties to the imperial family. The boy then asks the crucial question: how much was his life worth on the black market? How much did Dietrich pay for the service? Avero stammers that they don't know the exact value, making Jack frown. He didn't come to hear evasions. He wants concrete numbers. His furious gaze makes the leader sweet cold. Jack hates repeating orders and he's already losing patience with the evasions. Valentine watches everything with a scowling expression while Avero tries to divert the subject to contracts, legal clauses, and commission fees. The boy interrupts with a kick that nearly hits the leader. He didn't come to do business, but to collect a blood debt. Those involved in the plot are already dead, but the contract money is still in play, and Jack wants every coin returned. He gives an ultimatum. Avero has 1 week to return the full amount paid by Dietrich. A single missing gold will mean the end of the guild. Before leaving, Jack issues one final warning. No cent is to be diverted as an administrative fee. He'll know if there's a discrepancy. Avero remains silent, but his pale face shows he understands the gravity of the threat. There is no room for error. As they descend the stairs, Jack comments to his mentor that the conversation was productive. He will conduct his own parallel investigations. Back in the room, the staff crowd around the leader, who collapses onto the couch in despair. Between groans, he regrets having accepted Dietrich's request. Aristocrats killing aristocrats always bring trouble. His cry of regret echoes through the guild as he realizes he messed with someone far above his level. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.